I appear to be having a technical difficulty. I'm going to leave and come back.
Okay. All right, Councillor, I'll give you some time here.
You're live, Your Worship, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Stephanie. We'll just give Councillor McLeod a chance to reboot, and hopefully that will solve her issues. Is that any better for you, Councillor McLeod? Ah, we've got you. All right, we've got a full complement. So it's 5 o'clock, and I will call our meeting for Monday, December 13th, 2021 to order. And I will start by reading the Land Acknowledgement. For more than 15,000 years, the First Nations walked upon and cared for the lands we now call home. Anishinaabek, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and many others who were families, friends, and communities the way we are today. The town of Collingwood acknowledges the Lake Simcoe Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818 and the relationship it establishes with the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. We acknowledge the reality of our shared history and the current contributions of Indigenous people within our community. We seek to continue empowering expressions of pride amongst all of the diverse stakeholders in this area. We seek to do better and to continue to recognize, learn, and grow in friendship and community, nation to nation. And I will look for a motion to adopt the agenda, and the resolution reads as follows. The content of the council agenda for December 13, 2021 be adopted as presented, as amended. And there are two deletions for the in-camera. The OLT update is being deleted, as is the CAO evaluation process being deleted. So I'm going to look to council at this point. If there are anyone who still wishes to go in camera on the leave of absence issues, speak now. Okay, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I was just going to say that the more and more I think about that matter, I think I'm going to ask council to defer it until either we have a decision from the deputy mayor or we know of your timing. So if council defers that, I don't need to go in camera, but if we don't defer it, then I'd still like the option to go in camera for that, please.
All right. So with that being said, we will then delete those two in-camera items, and we will address the third when we get to that item in the agenda. So with those two amendments, I will look for a mover and seconder, please. Councillor Madigan and Councillor Doherty. I'll call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. And that brings us to declarations of pecuniary interest. Are there any declarations tonight, council? Seeing none, I have one, and that's item 10.3.1 in the Corporate Community Services Standing Committee. I'm a member of the Junior A Blues Hockey Board, so I will be removing myself from the item dealing with the All-Star Junior A All-Star item, and I will be passing the chair to Councillor McLeod. Are there any other items? Seeing none, then we will move on to adoption of the minutes, and the resolution reads that the regular meeting of council held November 22nd, 2021. The minutes of the regular council meeting held November 22nd, 2021 be approved as presented. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Madigan and Councillor Berman. Any errors or omissions, council? Seeing none, I will call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Is there any business arising from the previous minutes, council? Seeing none, we will move on then to community announcements. And I will start with Councillor McLeod, please.
Thank you so much, Mayor Saunderson. I have nothing tonight.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Comey.
Sorry, it took a minute to get my little cursor over there. Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I guess I would just speak to something I think all families are going through again at this time of year, like a big deja vu. Cases are rising. We're getting letters home from the school. And once again, guardians and parents are seemingly at the forefront of everything developing. So I would just encourage everybody to keep following along with the health unit information about vaccinations and watching for those letters and phone calls from the health department, and really just, again, thanking our educators and administrators on the front line of this, juggling circumstances yet again that are beyond their control. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Madigan.
Nothing for me tonight, sir.
Councillor Doherty.
Nothing for me this evening, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Berman.
Nothing for me, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jeffrey.
Nothing, Mayor Saunderson, thank you.
Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to mention one thing in light of the youth governance matter on the agenda. I thought I just mentioned that one of the organizations collecting food for our food bank this season is the Collingwood Youth Club. And for those who are of a mind to donate 10 cans of food to their outdoor bin, you too can get a t-shirt. Be the change. So white or black. That's my announcement. Thank you.
It's a great announcement, and it is the Project Butterfly that Councillor Hamlin's referring to. And so the box is located outside the youth center at 76 First Street, and please go by and drop off some foodstuffs. This is a tough time of year for many. I was at the Salvation Army last week for a donation announcement, and they are hard at work and they are stocking their shelves, and there is huge demand out there. So please take this opportunity. We are a very caring and compassionate community, and so if you have an opportunity, please go. And if you do give enough items, you will get a beautiful Project Butterfly shirt in support of this. And so thank you to the Youth Center and their supporting partners, the Environment Network and Elephant Thoughts for putting this together. The other announcement that I have is just to thank our Unity Collective and staff for bringing Dr. Makazivi, I think, hopefully I'm saying that right, Mandela. She is Nelson Mandela's oldest daughter, and an extremely impressive speaker in her own right, who came to speak about diversity and inclusion in our community and the challenges that presents. And it was a great hour, and I want to thank the Unity Collective and Nova, who was the moderator. She did a fantastic job. It was wonderful to see, and the sharing of the importance of diversity in our community. It makes us stronger, and fighting racism and bigotry is something that we all have to turn our minds to. It will make us a stronger community, a healthier community, and a far more inclusive one. So thank you for staff for putting that together. And with that being said, that brings us then to item 6, which is the public meeting. And this is our 2022 budget public meeting. Pursuant to the Municipal Act, we're required to hold a public meeting. And while we have allowed and had great engagement through our standing committee, the SIC, Strategic Initiative Standing Committee, as well as Engage Collingwood, we were doing this today as well to make sure that we give another opportunity to our public and our residents to speak on this important aspect of our annual processes. And I'm going to turn first to Clerk Almus just to make sure that we've circulated the notice pursuant to the Municipal Act. Sarah.
Thank you, Your Worship. Notice of the public meeting is also a requirement for the budget in accordance with our notice policy, required to be published and posted not less than 1 week in advance of the meeting. And I can confirm that notice has been provided in excess of 3 weeks for today's meeting.
Good, thank you very much. And so I'm hopeful that we'll have some members of our public here to speak today, and I would ask that they identify themselves and provide us with their municipal address, and then they have 5 minutes to speak to council today on the budget and any aspect of the budget that they'd like to address. And before I get to that, I will pass this over to Treasurer Quinlan for a brief presentation and update. Go ahead, Treasurer.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to members of council and the public. We do have a presentation coming up, and next slide, please. Once again, I just wanted to remind everyone on the journey that we've been through. This has been a long process, and much work from both staff and members of council have gone into the 2022 budget over the last 5 months. We're now at draft 4 that we're presenting this evening. But just briefly, we spent August pulling the team of staff together here to review the community-based strategic plan and master plans, as well as continuous improvement projects. We moved into September with the first draft, or the first staff report that was brought forward, and a tax rate increase of 1% was set as the guideline. Following that, in October, staff brought forward a report that outlined the budget requests that were greater than 20,000, and the resolution at that time was to move forward with these priorities into the next phase. There was lots of activity throughout the month of November as well, where initial drafts of the budget were presented to members of council. And we had 2 public engagement sessions on November 30th. And it's hard to believe, but here we are in December now, and we're presenting at our public meeting with anticipation that approval will move forward on December 20th, subject to any changes that come through this year, or this evening, sorry. Next slide, please. So since the last time we met, just a few changes have been made. However, there has been no change in the overall increase to the tax rate percentage. It does remain at 2%. These changes include Maple Street Priority Bike Project was removed. We had to increase the City View software renewal for bylaw as an updated quote was received. We also updated council wages to reflect the updated rates for November of 2022. And finally, we've moved around some timing in terms of capital projects and just altered them slightly to reflect the correct current timing. Next slide, please. Before we really dig into 2022, I wanted to give a brief update or overview of the projected 2021 year end. We'll note that the projected surplus is at 266,000. And on the 2 graphs that I've included, there's some of the province's financial indicators that they use to measure municipalities by. These indicators are certainly not everything or all encompassing, but they do touch on extremely important pieces of our financial condition. The slide on the left shows our net assets as a percentage of our own source revenues. You'll notice that it decreases slightly. However, we are still well above what the provincial averages were for 2019. Again, note, I haven't included the 2020 or 2021 provincial averages as they have not yet been published. The second graph, or the graph on the right, outlines our debt servicing costs. And you'll note a significant decrease due mainly to the retirement of 3 large debentures, which have now expired. I think overall, we're moving in the right direction, and that members of council have made great strides over the last few years. But we do need to continue to be mindful and thoughtful as we move through the future, as consumer price indices continue to soar and we finalize our asset management planning for phase 2. Next slide, please. Just as a reminder, we are currently at a 2% tax rate increase in this proposed budget. And note that from 2019 to 2021, overall, the town's tax rate decreased by over 4%, which translated into a savings of about $39 in total for a taxpayer with a median assessed home. With this proposed 2% tax rate increase on a median assessed home, it would result into an increase in taxes paid by about $45.93 over 2021. Next slide, please. So members of council and public have seen this slide several times, but it is sort of the best way for me to show the change from one year's levy to the next. So the 2021 levy is on the very far left of the graph and was set at 35.1 million. And you can see the 2022 proposed tax levy, and my apologies, it says draft 1, that should say draft 4, at 36.779 million. The red bars of the graph reflect unavoidable increases or decreases. You can see that the very first amount were reductions or increases to revenue of 840,000. And when we move through the center of the graph, the light blue bars represent the service enhancement or growth pieces that have changed the levy. Next slide, please. So this slide sums up the highlights of this draft. Again, essentially for each percentage point of taxation, it equates to around $370,000 in taxes collected. The total change in the tax levy from 2021 is just below 1.6 million. And just note that a portion of this change has been absorbed through the growth achieved in the current assessment of 2.4% for 2021. Next slide, please. This slide breaks down the amounts for each division or service per $100 collected in taxes. You'll note that the largest contributor is protection, which includes policing, fire, and bylaw enforcement. And then we move to administration, which also includes debt repayment and any reserves to any transfers to reserves, excuse me. And the third contributor is transportation, which includes roads and bridges, along with storm sewers and transit operations. Next slide, please. This graph represents the total expenditures for 2022. You'll see it's at 64 million. Again, you'll note that protection, administration, and transportation are the top three contributors to the overall operating budget. The administration, again, includes long-term debt and transfer to reserves throughout the year. Next slide, please. This graph breaks down the, yep, there we go. This graph breaks down the total capital expenditures for 2022 at 52 million. You'll note that water is set at 18.2 million and is the highest in expenditures. And it includes the beginning of the water treatment plant expansion, as well as interim UV capacity upgrades. Just a reminder that a majority of these costs are covered through development charges, and this purely represents the amount of expenditures and not the impact on the tax levy. We move to transportation at 15.2 million. Projects include the Minnesota storm sewer repair, as well as the continuation of Mountain Road widening and many other asset renewal projects. And finally, in third place is PRC, which follows at 9.3 million, and it includes projects such as Sunset Point Park and the new splash pad. Next slide, please. So I think it's also important to note that in this proposed budget that the special capital levy has been proposed to increase from 270,000 to 300,000. This recommendation formed part of the first phase of the asset management plan and will contribute somewhat to closing that financial gap you can see in the charts at the bottom of the slide. It means a rate increase of 11.2%. However, that equates to approximately $1.93 per year on a median assessed home. Next slide, please. These next few slides share what taxpayers are getting for their money out of the draft 2022 budget. Of course, staff will continue to provide and deliver the many programs and services that taxpayers have come to expect. It also contains continued focus and a drive towards achieving the community-based strategic plan. So under the transparent and accountable local government pillar, what we've included here are just the new items: enterprise risk management approach, the business continuity plan, extending the financial analyst contract, and also the communications position. Under the public connections to a revitalized world-class waterfront pillar, we have the design heritage drive update and extension of servicing. Again, this was a decision made through the asset sale legacy project, a waterfront public realm design plan for shipyards area, and local businesses leases of space in the Harborview Park for watercraft and bike rentals, so people can experience the waterfront in many new ways. Next slide, please. Under the support and manage growth and prosperity, we've got lots of new items, which include the continuation of the updated official plan in conjunction with the county's municipal comprehensive review. We have a development engineer. We'll start the updates to the zoning bylaw, the water and wastewater capacity allocation framework, enhanced communication with our development consulting planner and engineering communities, enhancing the post-approval support for developers and the community, enhancing the public-facing tools showing building and planning applications and approvals, and the introduction of a zoning certificate process, as well as delivering the 2022 Economic Development Action Plan. Next slide, please. We have the enhanced community well-being and sustainability pillar, where an affordable housing reserve fund has been established at $350,000. We've also included an affordable housing planning specialist at 80,000 and continued work on the Collingwood World Summit and Sustainable Development Goal 11 pilot projects. Under the Encourage Diverse Culture and Arts Offerings pillar, we proceed with the next steps recommended in the 2021 Art Center feasibility study to narrow and refine the scope of that Art Center concept, to continue and strengthen the Unity Collective and build inclusion and diversity into the town's approaches, including our human resource policies. Next slide, please. Additionally, we have a few other service enhancements that meet continuous improvement goals and other master plans and are, of course, highlighted in our draft budget book. We have the additional staffing resources requested, the business accelerator, the speed reduction study, the council compensation review, and the heritage tax relief. Next slide, please. Just as a reminder, we will continue with a laser focus on delivery with new trail crossings and signals and updated active transportation signage and markings, the water treatment plant expansion, along with some innovative interim capacity solutions. We have the Fisher Field improvements, as well as the much anticipated Sunset Point Park and the splash pad completion. Next slide, please. We're going to be preparing a strategic refresh with recommendations to manage short-term accommodations and to better enforce the rules. We will also have a review of the approach bylaw takes, including enforcement options with public input. We have both an IT and HR master plan update and continued supports for our staff and council to enable them to deliver exceptional services, including continued engagement, appreciation, and training supports. Next slide, please. I think it's also important that we refer back to what we heard from the public. And here we have the top 5 ranked issues that we gathered through the public survey. The first being housing and accommodations, economy, jobs and economic issues, environment and climate change, infrastructure and transportation, and then finally, number 5 is property taxes. Next slide, please. What I think is critical is that we communicate throughout the budget documents how the proposed 2022 budget addresses what the public said that were their top issues. I've only included the top 5 again, as I referred to in the last slide, but I think it's important information that ties these things together. Under housing and accommodations, we have 350,000 in the reserve fund. We have 80,000 for an affordable housing planning specialist and continued investment in social housing, both at the High Street and Birch Street properties. Under economy, we have 150,000 in the business accelerator and continued funding for the BDC. Next slide, please. Under environment and climate change, we do have the asset sale proceeds available under the Greening Legacy Reserve Fund at $1 million. There's 30,000 included in the budget to develop a climate action plan, $100,000 for the full year of a climate action change specialist, my apologies, 60,000 on the official plan update, many items under the wastewater treatment plant inflow and the water treatment plant expansion, 100,000 towards tree planting that was developed through donations, and finally 45,000 for a deaerator at the Eddie Bush Arena. Next slide, please. Under infrastructure and transportation, 15.4 million has been included in the capital budget for expenses related to asset renewal and expansion projects. And finally, under property tax rates, we have a modest 2% tax rate increase as the proposed amount for this evening's budget. I think that wraps us up. Next slide, please. Yep, that wraps it up. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Treasurer Quinlan. And with that, I will look to Clerk Almus to see if we have anyone in our audience who wishes to speak to council on this.
Thank you, Your Worship. We do have a number of attendees this evening. If you wish to speak to the budget, please press the raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen, and we can unmute you so you can address council. And it does not look like there's any guests wishing to present to council this evening regarding the budget.
Thank you, Clerk Almus, and thank you, Treasurer Quinlan, for the the excellent summation of our budgeting process so far and for establishing the top 5 priorities as set out by our public. That's a very helpful roadmap. With that being said, then we will move to item 7, which is our update on water capacity and land use planning study. And I'm going to pass it over first to CAO Skinner, but I understand this week we have some other speakers to include on this presentation. So I'll turn it over to you, Sonya.
Thank you, Your Worship. There are a few slides that we'll go through, and yes, we do have a number of guests who are going to provide you with a more comprehensive update this evening. And when I do turn it over, I'll be turning it over to Director Peggy Slama. And as well, I understand that Environmental Services Manager Heather McGinnity and the project engineer Ken Caden will be speaking to a few of the slides tonight. And I hope that council will find their update quite interesting. I had a preview of it very recently and was pleased. Next slide, please. So the reason that we do this update each week for council and the public is due to the resolution that's summarized here. And until the interim control bylaw is lifted, we provide updates on negotiations, RFPs, exemptions, and the like, and those are all included in this update. Next slide, please. So the situation hasn't changed. We have a water supply that's safe and available. Council's been very proactive since they became aware of this difficult solution in the first quarter of 2021. And it's been a very proactive and transparent approach, both seeking further capacity and managing what we have left. We have an interim control bylaw. It's applied to everyone, and it temporarily and transparently pauses development. So we make sure that we have the water that Collingwood needs to grow as a complete community. However, in 2021, we were able to approve all of the ready-to-go development applications in an accelerated fashion. And most residential renovations and additions can continue. If you have one, you're a homeowner and you have one, please don't hesitate to contact our planning or building departments, and they can help you understand the rules. And there's quite a bit of information on our Engage Collingwood site as well. So there's a good likelihood you'd be able to go forward with that type of work. With our chlorine maximized and new ultraviolet expected in 2023, we're closing in on the capacity to meet our expected growth if our plant is completed by the end of 2025 or early 2026. But we're not quite there, and thus we have a number of steps that will be explained in this presentation and updated. Next slide. So the first item is the water capacity update. So that's the plant itself. And I think this is where I will turn it over to Director Slama and her team for the exciting update I was telling you about earlier.
Thank you, CAO Skinner. If you could advance the slides, please. Yes, okay, so our update is next, and as CAO Skinner mentioned, we've got Manager McGinnity and Project Engineer Ken Caden with us this evening, and we wanted to provide council and the public with an update on how we're doing with our water treatment plant expansion project and what has been done this fall, and also provide an update which will explain some changes to the schedule that we have showed. So just a few alterations to better represent some of the milestones that we will be seeing in the project over the next 4 years. So with that, I'll ask the next slide to be advanced, and I'll pass it over to Manager McGinnity.
There we go. Thank you very much. All right, so the water treatment plant expansion and upgrade project is being fast-tracked through the design and construction phases to help ensure sufficient drinking water is available for planned growth in Collingwood, as well as in our customer municipalities. In addition to fast-tracking the expansion, the decision was made earlier this year to increase the scope of the water treatment plant expansion project to include enhanced disinfection for the existing water treatment plant to resolve concerns about chlorination requirements during the winter months. And at a previous update to council, we were pleased to be able to share that the engineering design and construction administration contract was awarded to the consulting team from AECOM and Ainley. Now, the town's project manager, Ken Caden, will share what we've accomplished and some key decisions that have been made on this project in the first 5 months, which I will then tie into an updated project schedule. So next slide.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. We've been hard at work on this massive project since our first kickoff meeting back in July. And we're going to give you a quick update on our progress so far, including stakeholder and design workshops that we've held, some procurement to date that we've achieved, some pre-selection and pre-purchasing of some major significant pieces of equipment for the plant, and general contractor pre-qualification, and we'll give you some next steps as we move into 2022. As you can see in this slide, the green being on schedule, the blue being ahead of schedule, and the gray being unfortunately delayed. We've accomplished a lot already, and there's a lot more to come. Next slide, please. So over the summer and in the early fall, we had 14 workshops totaling about 80 hours of time to discuss design elements, various disciplines with multiple stakeholders, confirm the scope, define the expectations, and provide an opportunity for stakeholders, review agencies, and internal groups as well to make requests for consideration during the design. These workshops are helpful to identify design measures that need to be addressed before submitting for approvals, and to give the design team a clear picture of the expectations and the path ahead. The goal was to request and identify preferences and expectations now to avoid having to do rework in the future and during approval processes. Next slide, please. So procurement to date, we've gone ahead with our team of AECOM and Ainley, and we've pushed the pace to procure investigation services for several aspects of the job already. We've got our geotechnical and hydrogeological investigation lined up. We had a tender issued to the 2 roster engineers on the town's roster for those types of services, and a PO has now been awarded to Peto McCallum to complete this work, which will include boreholes, test pits, groundwater monitoring on site, and this will give our design team critical information to complete the structural design and construction dewatering requirements. We've also got our designated substances consultant lined up, which again, we issued an open tender this time, multiple site visits from interested bidders, and we've awarded a PO to Pinchin Limited to begin their work on site, looking at sources of asbestos, silica, lead, and other issues that need to be addressed during any of the demolition works that'll need to occur. So this gives our design team the ability to draft appropriate specs for that work. And the third one is the subsurface utilities, which is again another open tender, multiple bids received, and a PO has been issued to Multiview, the successful consultant, and they're actually beginning their work on site tomorrow to identify existing utilities both above and below ground, map everything out with details regarding alignment, depth, and sizes. And this information again is critical to the design team for precise scope for the construction and avoid damage to existing infrastructure, define what needs to be removed, and stuff we can tie into for the expansion. Next slide, please. We've also gone ahead and gone the route of pre-purchase and pre-selection and pre-purchase of 2 significant pieces of equipment for the expansion project. So this is the UV, both for the temporary system as well as the ultimate, and for the membranes as well. So the decision to do this pre-purchase and pre-selection process rather than allowing the general contractors to select items later is we can manage the inevitable long delivery times for this type of equipment. And this has been further exacerbated by the COVID supply chain issues we're seeing for lots of stuff in the industry. We've got more detailed design information available during the design process, so it limits and reduces conflicts during construction that come up. And while it has resulted in a slight delay to the design process, to get these things lined up now, we think we can overcome that and expedite construction. So we've pre-selected and pre-purchased our UV. We had a couple of bids for that. It went out to open market, and we've awarded a PO to Denora. So they'll start working on shop drawings for our first contract for the interim UV, which we hope to have in place in the winter of 2023. And the second is the membranes. And again, we had a successful bid, which we're in negotiations with now. Next slide, please. So we took a little different approach for this project as opposed to the traditional design bid build strategy. And we've decided to incorporate an alternative to delivery. We're calling it the Constructability Review General Contractors approach, which has allowed us to advance the pre-qualification of general contractors as part of this project. And we have closed that tender, and we're working through the award to the successful general contractors, who will be then allowed to bid on the temporary UV installation, as well as the large plant expansion later on. The big thing with this is we get the general contractors involved during the design stage in constructability reviews, and they're going to be compensated for this as part of their involvement in the project. And hopefully the idea is to reduce extras and construction delays that occur. And we're still going to be allowed to have a competitive bid process in the end with up to 4 pre-qualified industry-leading contractors. Next slide, please. So next steps. The next steps are going to be to continue to push the design forward and integrate the feedback from the stakeholders in our design workshops. So these workshops helped us identify areas to improve resiliency of our plant, integrate the surrounding parks and trails network, provide meeting and administration office spaces for town staff, and to continue to develop our relationship with the First Nation community. One aspect that we can't overlook here is climate change. The design and construction has to eliminate some existing shoreline and coastal slope stability deficiencies that have been identified in the area, and to recognize that this was identified during the EA. However, the recent events in BC has brought the matter of climate change and an impact on municipal infrastructure to the forefront. So the scope and associated costs have to be expanded to address this. And this is money that needs to be spent to protect a significant investment that we're going to make in infrastructure here. Next slide, please. So in the new year, we'll be bringing an updated project budget and schedule forward based on changes identified through the stakeholder consultation process and summarized previously. These items require serious consideration, but will impact some costs and impact the project schedule. So based on what's happening in the marketplace, we're concerned that the schedule is at risk of being pushed back due to labor shortages and supply chain issues we've all heard about, and risk of being exceeded due to extraordinary levels of inflation that we're seeing on construction equipment and materials, especially right now. This is something we'll have to continue to monitor and find ways to mitigate as we move forward with this project. So we'll continue to move forward with the recommendations and bring forward a recommendation regarding the temporary membrane concept that was proposed to provide interim additional water treatment capacity while the new plant is being constructed. So we'll come forward with that. And work on the temporary UV will continue with a tender being issued to those pre-qualified general contractors early in the new year. So the detailed design of the new plant, the infrastructure Canada climate lens assessment work will be completed, by our consultant team to complete a greenhouse gas mitigation assessment, which measures the anticipated greenhouse gases, GHG emissions impact on the infrastructure project, and a climate change resilience assessment, which involves a risk management approach to anticipate, prevent, withstand, and respond to and recover from and adapt to climate change related disruptions or impacts on the facility. Completing this climate change lens or climate lens assessment for this project does make us eligible for some potential federal funding, which is going to be important. We're also undertaking some water quality monitoring, both pre, during, and post-construction in collaboration with our First Nation community. And we plan to bring forward a design to the public for comment, as well as continue to pursue potential funding opportunities to secure agreements with our customer municipalities, including New Tech and the town of Blue Mountains. With that, I'll pass it back to Heather. Thank you.
Thanks. If you could move to the next slide, please. Great. So based on some of the decisions that we've made early in the project, as well as the status of some tasks that are on the critical path for the interim UV implementation, we've worked with our consultant to confirm and update some of the milestones for this project. The next couple of slides will tie this updated information into the water treatment plant expansion schedule that's been presented to council over the past 6 to 9 months. So next slide. So as council is aware, we are proceeding with the addition of UV disinfection to enhance the existing disinfection processes at the water treatment plant. So once this decision was made, the team decided to pre-select and pre-purchase both the UV and membrane filtration equipment due to schedule being the top priority for this project and other benefits that Ken outlined earlier. As UV was originally planned to be a design spec in the general construction tender, this decision resulted in an additional procurement step that needed to be completed this fall. And in addition to UV pre-selection and pre-purchasing as a procurement step, some delays in the procurement process for the UV has resulted in the goal of having UV in place by the end of 2022 becoming more of a challenge. However, our entire team is focused on bringing this UV online in winter 2022-2023, and we're continuing to push forward with the design and tender preparation. As Ken mentioned, we're expecting that tender to be issued in early 2022. Next slide. The decision to implement an alternative project delivery approach involving the pre-qualified general contractors in constructability reviews during design has also resulted in a schedule shift for the pre-qualification of the general contractor. This procurement was advanced to fall of 2021 from fall of 2022, which meant reallocating resources to complete this task sooner in the schedule. Next slide. So as a result of advancing the general contractor pre-qualification and making the decision to pre-select and pre-purchase the UV, we are seeing some delays in our preliminary design and public consultation steps. These will take place now in spring of 2022 instead of fall 2021, fall winter 2022. But we expect to make up these schedule differences later in detailed design. And we also hope that these decisions will help our project stay on schedule during construction. Thank you very much. Be happy to answer any questions at this time.
All right. Are we finished, CAO, or is there more to go?
I have, thank you, Chair. I have the rest of the normal presentation, which I can run through now, or if you prefer, at your choice, we could ask our detailed design and our design and execution team questions at this time.
Well, maybe just given the extent of the new information, I will open it to council to ask questions on the design and scheduling. If they have questions on that, we can bring them up now. Go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So was that the exciting part? Because I'm a little disheartened. So am I assuming correctly that the delay changes are within the predetermined schedule we had for the entire project, but we're still forecasting to bring the entire project in on time but there's these delays within that timeline, or is this going to push out the finish date at the end?
Director Slama, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Jeffrey. Yes, you are correct. So what we wanted to show this evening was, a shift in the schedule that we have presented previously. But we wanted to show how some of the preliminary work that we're doing now, although it might be shifting preliminary design to a little bit later down the line, all of this pre-work is in an effort to keep the overall project and construction of the project on schedule and on target for the end of 2025. Again, I will remind council that the consultant did indicate in their proposal for the town that the expanded capacity will be online before the end of 2025, but work on the construction site will continue into 2026, and that's changes to the existing plant once the new capacity is online.
Follow-up, Councillor.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So the impact in terms of development and our management of it during that time period, does that change appreciably or not?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Jeffrey. So what Councillor McGinnity and project manager Ken Caden mentioned was the delays with the procurement of the UV component, the interim UV for our existing water treatment plant. So we know that those delays are putting some pressure on the schedule to have the UV for enhanced disinfection in place on the existing water treatment plant by the end of 2022. But in discussions with the consultant, we still feel it is achievable, but we wanted to just mention that now to council in case we're going to see delays, whether it be in material or equipment or something related to the completion of that work next year. So that would be the first step to increase available capacity to developers until we reach our plant expansion, and then the expansion target would remain the same with respect to development.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. I appreciate the answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor, any other questions or comments? I guess just an observation is that there's lots of moving parts, and I guess by wrestling with these design issues and procurement issues now, we're heading off delays that might be more extreme down the road. So it's good to see that happening, and I'm hopeful that we will be able to overcome any supply chain issues, although I'm sure that's going to be a moving part as well. So with that being said, then I'm going to pass it back to CAO Skinner to take us through the rest of the presentation. Go ahead, Sonya.
Thank you, Your Worship. And also in response to you and Councillor Jeffrey, I do think some of these decisions are going to move us forward much faster than a conventional approach, and that the experience of our consultants and our team, our own team, has been quite helpful in identifying how to get ahead of others who might be, for example, ordering complex pieces a year from now instead of now. So I think we're positioning ourselves as well as we possibly can and know how to do. So it is exciting to me to see some of the things that have evolved in a good way. I'll just run through the remaining slides very quickly. The things that have happened recently have included a few things like the UV vendor that Ken Caden mentioned. No other big changes, no other changes on this slide. Next slide, please. Also, no changes in the remaining water supply. However, there is a decision that's been through committee that will come to council. I believe it's actually next week from Development and Operations Committee, with a couple of additional small exemptions that have been recommended for decision. So should council make that decision, we'll update these numbers. after next week. Next slide, please. With respect to the land use planning policy study, there are a couple of updates. Next slide, please. Just a quick reminder that anyone who has already received an exemption, exemptions are for the land use planning study period. And afterwards, water will be approved and managed according to the study recommendations. And the study and the proposed policy does deal with projects that are already in the process of being approved. If you've been granted an ICBL exemption, you should continue through the process. And if you haven't, then we will process your application, your planning application up to the council decision-making point. And it was mentioned in a recent meeting that we communicate to folks who have an exemption what will happen at the end of the ICBL. So staff are undertaking to do that. And I have been reminded, actually, in fact, on the previous slide, I had said that the exemptions were on the agenda for next week, but they actually are on the agenda tonight. So you will see that in a few minutes as this meeting progresses. Thank you. Next slide. This based slide hasn't changed for the land use planning policy study. We've just moved the green arrow down one more week. So the preparation of the version 2 report with the recommendations is being done right now, and we'll be presenting the land use planning policy study recommendations to council next Monday. So that's the water allocation policy as updated after consultation, the zoning bylaw, and any changes to the official plan, things like that, that council should consider to move forward. Next slide, please. And the target timeline for the zoning bylaw amendment, which is the critical path right now, is noted on this slide. So pending a decision on the 20th with respect to the zoning bylaw changes, in late December, there would be notice of a public meeting at council, which would lead to late March being the last day for appeals. So if we did have appeals or changes in that schedule, we'd likely be asking council to continue the ICBL beyond the initial 1-year period. But we really do hope that we will be presenting an approach that will allow council to lift that ICBL within the year and move forward with the new framework for water allocations. Next slide, please. No changes to the building statistics and the message from last week. And the general comment is that we have been quite active and generally on par with 2020 in our 2021 building permits and occupancies. Next slide, please. Also, no changes to this slide, but the key message behind this one, and I'll tell you the details in a second, but what you'll see is that the light gray portions of each pie, which are generally the same information, just looking at it a little differently, show that we have about half or just under half of the water that was exempted that can move forward this year. The building that can move forward has not yet moved forward. So those are items that are eligible for building permits and have exemptions. So there's lots of work that could yet go out through the rest of December and through the first quarter of 2022. So the first pie on the left just looks at the percentage of exempted projects that have gone forward. And you'll see the dark blue is 35% of the building permits have gone forward. Another 20% have been submitted and are in the process of approvals. And 45% of the projects that are eligible to go forward have not yet applied for building permits. And the pie at the right is similar. It just looks at it by the amount of water that's in each state as opposed to the number of permits. Next slide, please. And that is the end of the update for this week. Thank you.
Thank you, CAO Skinner. Council, are there any questions or comments on the second part of the presentation? Seeing none, then we will move on to item 8, which is the consent agenda. And I'll read in the resolution that council herein receive the general consent agenda, and further that the information and opinions provided in the general consent agenda items are those of the authors and are not verified or approved as being correct. There's 3 items tonight. 8.1, Georgia Jacoby, draft water and wastewater allocation policy. 8.2, RJ Burnside and Associates Limited, draft water and wastewater allocation policy. And 8.3, SkyDev, response to land use planning policy study recommendations. I'll look for a mover and a seconder. First to receive the consent agenda, Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Hamlin. I will first call the vote on that, and then I will ask if there's any items to be pulled. So all in favor? And that is approved unanimously. Council, are there any items that you'd like to pull from the consent agenda tonight? Seeing none, we will then move on to item 9, reports and minutes of other committees and boards. Resolution reads.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I did have my card up. I think you just didn't see it.
I didn't see it. My apologies. Councillor, go ahead.
Yes, I really just had a comment or perhaps a question for staff. I thought all 3 of these letters raised good points about our allocation policy. And through you, Mr. Mayor, I was wondering how these are going to be taken into account, what the process is now moving forward.
I'll see Director Valentine has showed up. So Director Valentine, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Hamlin. These were 3 of the approximately 30 letters that we received when we requested input on the town's draft land use planning policy results, which included an allocation policy for consideration. The remaining of the letters will be provided to you and as a link in the staff report anticipated for next council agenda, December the 20th. And the consultant will be at the meeting as well to describe how the various letters and comments were taken into account. So these 3 were addressed specifically to council. So that is why they ended up on the consent agenda, but you will be seeing all the letters that staff received, as well as a summary of the general comment themes and how they were addressed in the next council cycle.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
No other questions on the consent agenda? All right. That'll take us to item 9 then, and that is the minutes and reports of other committees and boards. And the resolution reads that the minutes of the following boards be hereby received and recommendations contained therein be approved. Item 9.1, Collingwood Public Library Board minutes, November 25, 2021. I'll get that moved by Councillor Berman, who's a member of that board, and I'll look for a seconder, please. Councillor Madigan. And I will call the vote, and then if anyone wishes to speak to an item from the minutes. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Is there any aspect or item on that minute that council would like to raise or question? Seeing none, and we'll get into standing committee reports. Item 10.1, standing committee report from the Special Strategic Initiatives meeting of November 17, 2021. And I'm just going to look to the clerk to get clarification. These recommendations go back from one of our first discussions of the budget. So Clerk Thomas, just for the purposes of this, receiving this report tonight, I guess the council should understand that they have, the budget is not in its final form before council yet. And so any items that were approved or defeated at that meeting can be raised yet again at the subsequent meeting. So any approval in terms of receiving these items doesn't prejudice any discussion on these items moving forward. Is that fair?
Correct, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I'll read in the recommendation. And it reads that council received the Strategic Initiatives Standing Committee report from its meeting held November 17, 2021, and hereby approve the recommendations contained within the report as presented. And recommendation read 2022 draft budget. Number 1, that $1,500 be added to each council member's professional development account. That was carried by a vote of 4-3. the 10,000 be included in the 2022 budget for a pollinator strategy, and that was defeated 2-5. And that $350,000 be included in the 2022 budget for an affordable housing reserve fund land trust, and that was carried unanimously. That council request additional information regarding feasibility of sidewalk widening extending on 5th Street be provided before the next round of budget deliberations, and that was defeated by a vote of 2-5. And that the Strategic Initiatives Committee directs staff to organize engagement opportunities for the public to provide their 2022 budget input to council prior to final consideration. And that was carried, and some of that has happened. So can I get a mover and a seconder for this recommendation, please? And I've got Councillor Madigan and Councillor Hamlin. And I will call the vote unless anyone wishes to pull an item for a change in direction. Councillor Comey, and then Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. Sorry. Well, all my cards slipped off my desk at once. Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Can I please request we pull the first two items, which be the 1,500 and the pollinator strategy.
All right, and you would like to change the direction on those items?
Yes, I suppose, and I apologize if I've misunderstood. Are we able to revisit the vote on that? Can we have? Am I requesting a reconsideration?
It's not a reconsideration, Councillor, because we are able to reassess any of these up to the final budget approval. So you can certainly pull those two and then put them on the floor to be considered separately again.
Okay. Yes, please.
All right. So I will sever those two out. Councillor Doherty, which item did you wish to speak to?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, along with Councillor Comey, I had wanted to ask if we could reconsider the budget for the pollinator strategy.
Okay, so we'll pull those two items for a change in direction, and I will call the vote then on the balance of the items. So the first two are out, and then the last three are still included. So I'm going to call the vote then to receive those items. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. And then Councillor Comey, you wished to open the vote on item number 1, which is the $1,500 be added to each council member's professional development account. That was previously carried, and you'd like to speak to defeating that. Is that correct?
Yes, I'd like an opportunity to vote on that, and I will not be in favor of that increase.
Okay. Do you have any other comments on that item before I open it to council?
I had, through you, Mr. Mayor, I had previously emailed Treasurer Quinlan, and I apologize, she might not have the answer right at her fingertips, but I had asked her what our current allowances were and what this addition brings the total to. If she has that information handy and feels she'd like to share it, that would be great. But otherwise, no, I would offer no further comment.
I'm sure she does, but if memory serves me, I think it's $4,000 per counselor, and this would bring it down to $5,500 for all aspects of our education and conferences and any other items that would come under that allowance. And I'll look to Treasurer Quillen just to confirm that. Thank you. Yes, that's it. Does anyone else wish to speak to this item?
Oh, apologies, Ms. Mayor Saunders. So my comment and my rationale for this is I really see that in this day and age, there's so many webinars available. There are so many ways to manage your budget reasonably, and when it comes to abilities to participate in educational opportunities. And I think it also ties into a commitment to our ongoing climate change recommendations. So whereas I know oftentimes councils will lean into the travel costs associated with these attendances, we have to encourage finding alternative ways to participate in these events while reducing the carbon footprint and the climate, honoring the climate emergency we committed to. So those are my thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McLeod, Councillor Doherty, and Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Saunderson, to Clerk Almus. I believe that during the course of the conversation regarding the code of conduct, we had a conversation about these allowances being the rules regarding these allowances being expanded to include childcare. as a method of removing barriers for young women and men who may be interested in being counselors in the future to attend meetings. And I wonder if we could have an idea of when that revised policy, which I believe passed, is going to be coming forward.
And that's correct. It was Councillor Jeffrey's motion and request looking for ways to remove barriers, and I'll look to Clerk Collins for that.
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. It is together with a report, I believe, on health spending as well, and anticipated for February.
Okay, thank you. That's my question.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Doherty. Next, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you also to Clerk Almus. I supported this budget item because I was under the impression that this increased amount was put there to cover expenses such as childcare, and that was the reason why I supported it. Was I wrong? Or did I misunderstand?
Clerk Collins, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. To Councillor Doherty's question, this $1,500 I don't believe was specific to that, but it definitely would cover any changes to the existing policy that would provide for childcare coverage.
Thank you.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So my comments when I originally proposed this was that we had a judicial inquiry that certainly highlighted why members of council need to be more educated than ever, especially in terms of governance and their responsibilities. And you know, we had hundreds of thousands of dollars for staff improvement and staff expansion of their grids, but there was nothing for the improvement for council in terms of that learning. And so I still stand by that. I know Councillor Berman has another solution that may work if this 1,500 per doesn't go through. But I honestly feel that we need to encourage council members, and there's webinars online that are free, but not necessarily the ones we need. And I know the conferences, as they develop into hybrid formats and whatnot, that the costs are definitely going up for these conferences. They aren't always going to stay as almost unreasonably inexpensive as they were during the COVID crisis. So that's my input still so far.
Thank you. Councillor Berman, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson, and thank you, Councillor Jeffrey, for jogging my memory. A question through you, Mayor Saunderson, to the treasurer, I guess. Hi, Monica. What I was wondering was, rather than it being an increase to the budget by increasing this $1,500, is there any way to do this based on the net of all of council, so that I'm not looking for a policy where one could transfer to another, but if I'm $3,000 under my limit, somebody else is $3,000 over the limit, do we need to increase this tax item, or can we, find an alternative to balance it out at the end of the year?
Treasurer Quinlan.
Through your worship to Councillor Berman. I think it's possible to do that. I think it becomes a little bit tricky, just in the sense that the budgets are specific to each councillor. It doesn't mean we couldn't transfer, for example, if there was that particular situation. I just think it becomes a little tricky when we get to reporting it out, but certainly doable.
Follow, Councillor.
Yes, thank you. And I don't want to put the treasurer on the spot here, but I guess I'd be curious, maybe by next week, to know what the budgeted amount is on the first 3 years of this council for this category versus what was actually spent. And then that would help to know whether are we budgeting, whatever $40,000 and only 20,000 of it is being used, then maybe that is worth looking at. But I don't expect you to have that at your fingertips. Maybe you could get that and let us know.
Sure.
Well, I actually do. I'm just pulling it up because it is something we regularly report on. So just take a minute as my computer catches up here. So for example, I have 2 years and maybe they're not the best years. That's the only thing that becomes a bit difficult because it's 2020 and of course 2021. So I'd have to look back to get 2019 and 2018, but I wouldn't want to say obviously, but I would say that it's much lower in these last 2 years than it likely maybe was in 2019 and 2018. So I could get back to you on that.
Thank you. That would be great. And yeah, I get that the COVID years are an anomaly. Thanks.
Council, anyone who has not yet spoken wish to address this matter? Seeing none, Councillor Comey, you had your card up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Clerk Gomez, my apologies. So it isn't clear to me if you're saying that this additional funding is to support the childcare request that came before council, or is put in there simply for educational matters?
Clerk Gomez.
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. Based on the direction provided from council to come back with amending the existing expense policy to include childcare, then the extra $1,500 could be applied towards that. Right now, the policy doesn't provide the flexibility for childcare, so that's what will be coming forward in the report in February.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. If I can, Mr. Mayor, I still wouldn't support this in principle because, and perhaps speaking as the only member of council who has children, at least when I started in access to childcare needs, I would just say this: I wouldn't think it's helpful for a guardian to choose between education and childcare. So if you have a counselor in need of access to childcare funding, and you have another who doesn't, then they, by very definition, have greater educational opportunities than those who don't. No matter how you increase that ratio, it's not going to play out, in my opinion, equitably. It doesn't quite solve the heart of the matter. So while I very much support Councillor Jeffrey's motion for the childcare, I don't see this increase by very definition as a way to address that. I think we would need something more comprehensive that specifically carves out that need as a standalone without interfering with any council members' attempt to pursue any professional development they require. So I stand by my original comments, but very much appreciate the clarifications.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I will support this initiative. We went through an extensive judicial inquiry, and I think that the Municipal Act obliges council members to get training. We've seen that training for water treatment and our obligations under the Safe Water Drinking Act. We have a myriad of fiduciary obligations to our residents and our taxpayers, and there is an obligation on all of us to get out, attend conferences, to get education. I took an ONLY course online, so I didn't have to travel anywhere. I will be claiming the expense of that in this year. And I think that those are the opportunities we need to take advantage of. If you don't spend your full $5,500 accounting, you should at least be investing significant time and effort in educating. So training was identified by Justice Morocco as a critical part of our role, and I see it as an obligation and a duty to our residents. So I will be supporting this. With that being said, I will call the vote then, and we're voting in favor of it, of the addition of the 1,500. Again, Councillor Jeffrey, you had a comment?
Thank you, Mayor Salsa. I just wanted to clarify what we're voting on, whether Councillor Comey had put on a new motion to say not to support it, or we're just simply re-voting on the original motion to add 1,500 per council.
The way I'm casting it is we're re-voting. I think Councillor Comey asked that we re-vote on the matter, but it would still be a vote in the positive. So a yes would be to affirm the $1,500 addition, and a no would be to remove it or defeat it. Councillor McLeod.
Sorry, I think what we're asking actually is the motion is actually to defeat this, not to reaffirm it.
Motion was to reconsider it, bring it back on the table. So the nature of the actual motion, in my opinion, doesn't change. We're just revisiting it so we can vote to support it or defeat it. It was pulled to be voted on again. All right. So just to clarify again, we're voting, and if a yes vote will be to support that $1,500 be added to each council member's professional development account, and a no vote will be to defeat that item. All right. So with that being called, then I will call the vote. All in favor? And opposed? And that is carried. And the second item is that $10,000 be included in the 2022 budget for a pollinator strategy that was originally defeated. Councillor Comey's asked, and I think Councillor Doherty as well, that it come up again for consideration. So again, the vote would be a yes would be in favor of including the $10,000 in the 2022 budget, and a no would be to defeat it. And Councillor Comey, do you have anything you'd like to add before we call the vote?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I had mentioned previous comments that, and I won't, Dr. Culver doesn't necessarily have to speak to this. At some point in time, I believe we have to address this one way or another through our commitment to the Bee City Canada initiative. So it's not going to go away. And I just see it as, you know, dovetailing in so nicely to those climate commitments, and that these things really take time. So this person has to be onboarded, things have to be planted. And when it comes to planting, I mean, the sooner the better. I mean, the more time to grow and beautify. Why wait to the last minute to honor that commitment is just my opinion on that. Thank you.
Thank you. And is there any question or comment, further comment before I call the vote? Seeing none, all in favor of including the $10,000 in the upcoming budget? And opposed? So that's a tie, and that is defeated. And that brings us then to 10.2, Standing Committee Report, Special Strategic Initiatives and Special Strategic Initiatives meeting of November 29, 2021. And I'll read in the resolution 10.2.1. And what I am going to do is I'm going to sever the first item, but I'll get to that. So the resolution reads, the council received the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee reports from its meeting held November 29, 2021, and hereby approve the recommendations contained within the report as presented, noting that we moved into closed session for the purpose of receiving advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose to the Code of Conduct. First item was CAO 2021-15 Interim Control Bylaw number 2021-24 exemption requests, commercial projects with no additional water capacity and accessory residential units. Number one, exemption request for 39th Street, 269 6th Street, and 146 Ontario Street be approved. Two, exemption requests for accessory residential units be reviewed and advanced for consideration by council on a case-by-case basis. And three, the bylaw number 2021-85 being bylaw to amend the interim control bylaw number 2021-24 be enacted and passed this 13th day of December 2021. Item two was C 2021-24 2021 Town of Collingwood procurement bylaw. The bylaw number 2021-86 being a bylaw to provide for the procurement of goods and services be enacted and passed as amended this 13th day of December 2021. CCS 2021-5 COVID-19 considerations and mandatory vaccination policy, that the policy be approved as amended by the Standing Committee. T 2021-22 2022 fees and charges, the bylaw number 2021-87 being a bylaw to establish the 2022 fees and service charges be enacted and passed this 13th day of December 2021. And I am going to sever The first one, which is CAO 2021-15 Interim Control Bylaw number 2021-24 exemption request, because there is an update that we should get from Director Valentine before we do address that issue. So with that being said, can I get a mover and a seconder for the balance, please? I'm just looking for a mover and a seconder first. We're going to get it on the floor and then I'll ask for cards. So I've got Councillor Berman and Councillor Hamlin. And are there any items that council would like to pull for a change in direction? Councillor Doherty, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, the 2022 fee schedule pull for change.
All right. Are there any other items to be pulled for a change, Councillor Jeffrey?
So just to clarify, thank you, Mayor Saunderson, that all of these were voted on unanimously at the meeting. Henceforth, why they went into this report, is that correct?
Yes, that should be the case, and I will look to Clerk Almus to confirm that. But yes, unless they were all approved, that's the way we would be dealing with them. Yeah.
Because if it were otherwise, I was going to ask for the vaccination policy to be pulled only for a recorded vote. But if it was unanimous going into this, then that's probably redundant. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So with that being said, then I'm going to call the vote on the items with save and except for CAO 2021-15, the interim control bylaw number 2021-24 exemption request, and T 2021-22, the 2022 fees and charges. So I'm going to call the vote on the balance. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Thank you. And then we will go to fees and charges. Councillor Doherty.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I did vote to support the fees and charges recommendations for 2022, in spite of the fact that I disagreed strongly with the fees that were being recommended for taxi licensing. Because I feel that in an age of rideshare and rideshare becoming more and more important competition to conventional taxis, that we need to do what we can to level the playing field. And by keeping the fees at least at the 2021 rate, we would not be doing anything further to reduce the competitiveness of our local taxis. So I could either ask to have the taxi fees severed entirely out of the fees and charges, or I could propose an amendment to hold the fees at the 2021 level.
Okay, so what I'm going to suggest is that we sever out the taxi fees, vote on the remainder, and then you can bring a motion with respect to the change that you'd like to see for the taxi fees.
Thank you.
All right. So then with that being stated, I will call the vote for the receiving the balance of the fees and charges report, save and except for the portion that refers to the taxi fees and licensing. And Clerk Almus, so we've got a mover and a seconder. So then I will call the vote then on receiving T 2021-22, 22 fees and charges, save and except for the taxi fees. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. And Councillor Doherty, you'd like to propose a change for the fees relating to taxi licenses? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I would, my amendment would be that we would hold the fees at the 2021 rates, understanding that we will be doing a robust evaluation of all of our licenses and licensing agreements, but it seems to me that until we do so, that we should certainly be holding those fees at the same level. And it also assists in leveling the playing field as much as we can in this particular category.
All right. Do we have a seconder for that, please? Councillor McLeod. Go ahead, Councillor McLeod. You're muted, Councillor.
I did. I seconded this to get it on the table so that I can ask the following question, because I'm scrambling to try to remember what these numbers are. And how many dollars are we talking about here? And I shall ask that through you, Mayor Saunderson, to Treasurer Quinlan, please.
Treasurer Quinlan.
Hi there. I'm sorry. I am also trying to see. I was just pulling it up as will only take me.
Councillor Doherty may have that information. Go ahead, Councillor Doherty.
I have it, Your Worship. It is a 4% increase for the original application of a value of $232. Also limousine is an increase of $117 to $2,790. So they are percentage-wise not huge, but dollar-wise, they are fairly significant.
Follow up, Councillor.
Thank you, Treasurer Quinlan and Councillor Doherty.
Councillor Hamlin.
I have a question about this. And I'm wondering to what extent our fees for taxi cab licenses, and sorry, this is through Mr. Mayor to staff, are impacting the level of service of our cab companies. And I don't know if staff knows the answer to this, or this is something we'll be looking at in the future, but what I'm wanting to mention is friends several weeks ago were at a restaurant on a Saturday night in town and couldn't get a cab. They were told it was 45 minutes. And the poor restaurant owner had to, well, didn't have to, but offered up one of his staff people and drove the guests home. And I thought, that is not how, one of the jobs of our small businesses in town, to pull their wait staff and to drive their patrons home. So, I've been mulling this problem over. And so back to my question, which is, do we know to what extent these fees are impacting the level of service we're getting from our cab drivers?
Who from staff would like to take that question? It may be that that calls for maybe speculation that's beyond our knowledge base at this point. That may be the case. Go ahead, CAO Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm sort of thinking the clerk might take this one. There is a bylaw for taxi cabs and limousines in Collingwood. The total number that are licensed by the town is actually capped by the town, and you pay to get on the waiting list. So right now, there's only one company that has come to the top, and they've been providing those services for some time. And I do think that overall, it's something we need to look at as a town, and it is a priority that's been proposed for 2022. But I think that the number is limited by the number of licenses that have been made available through past council decisions. Thank you.
Follow up, Councillor.
No, but thank you for that clarification.
Councillor Jeffrey, get your card up.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Specifically to the licensing situation, I know I've brought up previously a solution a colleague in Vancouver talked to me about, but it's about getting our taxis able to go both ways reciprocally with those taxis licensed out of Blue Mountains, because our taxis are going one way and coming back empty. And that's not only not good climate wise, but it's just not good for a business plan either. So it's another solution that we can put into the mix going forward.
Are there any other questions or comments on Councillor Doherty's amendment before I call a vote? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Is defeated. Thank you. So that brings us then to CAO 2021-15, the interim control bylaw number 2021-24 exemption requests. I'm going to pass it over to Director Valentine to give us a bit of an update in the status of this matter since it was approved by the SIC. Director Valentine.
Thank you, Your Worship, for the opportunity to speak to this item tonight. The report, as originally advanced through the Strategic Initiatives Committee, suggested that there were 3 properties requesting an exemption to the interim control bylaw. 2 of those properties represented proposals that were a commercial change of use with no additional water capacity. And the 3rd was for an accessory residential dwelling unit, and that would represent 0.66 SDUs of additional capacity. And the committee did consider it desirable to look at exemptions for accessory residential dwelling units on a case-by-case basis as they came forward. Subsequent to the posting of the SIC agenda, we did receive 2 additional requests for exemptions to the interim control bylaw, and staff spoke to those verbally at the SIC meeting and committed to including those in an amended report, which is before you today. The analysis is in your agenda package as part of the report, but to briefly summarize, the first additional property was 268 Robinson Street, and that again is a proposal for an accessory dwelling unit, which would have 0.66 SDU impact on water capacity requirements. And the second is 795843 Gray Road 19, and that exemption request is for a vacant parcel of land where development is contemplated on a private well and private septic system. So there would be no impact on water capacity. And in fact, municipal services are not available to that property today and are not anticipated in the near future for that location. So staff have incorporated those additional 2 requests into the report and resolution, and the overall effect, should council wish to consider, that would be 5 properties being exempted from the interim control bylaw, and the total commitment for water capacity is just shy of 2 single dwelling unit detached equivalents. Happy to answer any questions if there are any from council.
Thank you, Summer. I'm just going to look to the clerk first. So my recollection of the SIC was that we approved these in principle. We didn't have all the details there, so I appreciate that the details have been brought forward now. Does that change the wording of the resolution that's on the floor? Do we need to change that to specifically refer to these 2 properties?
Thank you, Your Worship. The bylaw that was included in your package in the staff report wording is correct. So the resolution should be the same as provided in that staff report. That includes the additional property. And there's one last and further that line that speaks to the Gray Road 19 property as well.
Okay, I've got the whole package in front of me, but perhaps you could just read that in then for me, and I will get it confirmed by the mover and the seconder, and then we can put it on the floor for discussion. So if you wouldn't mind reading again in clerk thumbs, it would be appreciated.
Certainly, thank you, Worship. So the second last and further line also includes the property identified as 268 Robinson Street. And the last and further that line is and further that the rural lands identified as 795843 Gray Road 19 be exempt from the provisions of the interim control bylaw 2021-024 and added to the bylaw Schedule A for the purposes of establishing a single detached residential dwelling in recognition that municipal services are not available or anticipated in the near future, and that there is no impact on water capacity allocation, and that limited rural residential growth is permitted in the applicable planning instruments.
All right, so we're going to amend that on the floor, and I'm going to look to my mover and seconder, who apologize, I can't recall who you are, just to make sure that you're comfortable with that. So we have this amended version on the floor. So if the mover and seconder could self-identify for me and just indicate that they're comfortable with that wording. Councillor Doherty is volunteering, and Councillor Madigan. So hopefully you guys were the movers and seconders. I don't know, Sarah, if you had that written down. I've forgotten. I didn't write it down. But in any event, we've got the wording on the floor, approved by our mover and seconder. Are there any questions or comments, council, before I call the vote? Councillor Jeffrey, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson, through to Director Valentine, just to make sure that we haven't bypassed any public opportunity to comment on this. It was brought to our attention at SIC, but I'm not sure there would have been any advance advertisement or if it's even necessary, but I just wanted to ask that question.
Director Valentine.
Through your worship to the councillor. So we did speak verbally to the two requests, but as they had just been received in advance of the meeting, we didn't provide the detail that we have tonight. So I would certainly defer to Clerk Almus if there is an additional step required. However, the folks who made that request have been informed, both those requests have been formed along the way of the process, and we're aware that the requests are being considered tonight by council.
Clerk Almus.
Sorry, can I clarification on the question?
I think Councillor Jeffrey was just concerned that if these are coming on the table tonight, that although it was mentioned at the SIC previously, that we haven't skipped any opportunity for public input or necessary notice under the exemption or ICBL, I guess, that for the exemption requests. So I think the question really is, have we missed any steps in terms of public notice or input?
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. Just for clarification, amendments can happen to staff reports following a standing committee meeting, and that's why we specifically identify amendments within each staff report, and there is no additional notice that is required in accordance with the procedure bylaw.
Good, thank you. Does that assist, Councillor?
That's great, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments before I call the vote on this? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. That brings us, sorry, yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Sorry, since the resolution regarding the taxi fees was severed to vote on separately, which was defeated, we will need a motion to approve them as was presented.
Okay then. So then going back to T 2021-22, the 2022 fees and charges, we had severed the portion dealing with the taxi fees and charges. The amendment was defeated, so now we need to deal with the main motion that was part of the staff report on the fees and charges. So I think I need to get a mover and a seconder then, because initially, okay, so I got Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Hamlin. Any questions or comments before I call the vote on this? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is opposed. Duly noted. Thank you. So that is carried. And then I think that does bring us to 10.2.2. That seems. Bylaw review and update, and the resolution reads as follows. Staff report C 2021-14, procedural bylaw review and update be received, and council approve the recommendations contained herein. And that the council enacted and passed bylaw number 2021-90, which includes recommendations of the Strategic Initiatives Committee of November 29, and continue with the existing standing committee governance structure subject to switching meeting times for corporate and community services and strategic initiatives. Strategic initiatives. So can I get a mover and seconder to get that on the floor, please? Councillor Madigan and Councillor McLeod. I will open the floor to questions or comments on this. Go ahead, Councillor Doherty, and then Councillor Jeffrey.
I'm sorry, Your Worship, it's just a point of order. We had two bylaws under the previous item to pass.
Yes, and I had read those in and they were moved and seconded, and I dealt with them after I severed off the two issues.
Okay.
So they have been dealt with.
Okay.
So
good.
I think we're good there. Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So further to my questions at our last SIC meeting, I believe it was, I sent some concerns to Clerk Almas and we didn't get an opportunity to talk about them today. But my concern is virtually, I know that we have to really evolve here, but I don't think we should set up opportunity for bad practices or the such. So I guess my concern is when we're attending meetings off screen, we don't want to be appearing to picking and choosing what items we're voting on. And we need to have a good handle on our attendance during the meeting or at a meeting. And so the three things, and I was just afraid of unintended consequences because the clerk would be able to, and this would need to be added or reconsidered unless the clerk thinks they're already covered enough under the virtual, and I'm sorry, I don't have the number in the procedural bylaw, but there is a list there of some of the virtual best practices. But my thing was no screen off during in camera. If a member is going in and out of a meeting for whatever circumstances we have in our work-life balance, to facilitate the voting, is it being recorded in the minutes that as soon as the screen goes off, they've left the meeting, so they're not voting, so they don't count as a no vote? Or they've left the meeting, they're not a vote at all? I just want that clarified, and I really think we need it clarified in the procedural bylaw. So I was really counting on the clerk on having the proper wording for that, or at least comments on whether we need it or not, or depending on the timing of when we have to have this out, I was going to ask to refer it back to the clerk to just finalize up that stuff before we do the final vote. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Clerk Almas.
Thank you, Your Worship. Further to the amendments that were provided at the last SIC regarding the procedural bylaw, we did include an additional paragraph under electronic participation on that section 4.27. And we worded it specifically to address the issue of when a person is leaves the meeting, so we can ensure that attendance is appropriately recorded. But we're also taking into account, as this provision is also applicable to our committees and boards, that some members participate by telephone or could have some sort of technical difficulty with regards to the camera. So the wording that we included was, if a member participating remotely must leave the meeting for any length of time wherein they are not able to participate in the discussion or vote, the member shall immediately inform the clerk or recording secretary of their absence, that they will acknowledge in the minutes and further advise the chair. Any vote taken during their absence would only include the members present and indicate the member's absence during the vote. Should a member participating in the meeting remotely not make their vote known at the time the vote is called and has not advised the clerk or recording secretary of their absence, the vote shall be considered an abstention and therefore deemed as a negative vote.
I see Councillor Jeffrey nodding. Sarah, is it possible to get that up on the screen? I know this is an addition that's happened based on recent events. So if maybe council gets an opportunity to have a look at it and read it, that might be helpful.
It's this section here.
All right, so I'll open the floor. Councillor Jeffrey, you have any questions or comments based on the wording that's presented?
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I think it's the best we can do given the circumstances and the difficulty. I mean, most of it will come down to, I think, our council members' integrity and willingness to be open and transparent about their participation. So I think that wording probably covers it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got first Councillor Comey, then Councillor Madigan.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Through to Clerk Almas, if I were to think of a suggestion, I think the net effect though, and the question I'm left with is, what is the net effect on the overall consideration of attendance? So if there's an unexplained absence for an extended period of time, and it's not aware of why the member has left, is the net effect that they're still counted as being in attendance at the meeting? Like, what I think the only verbiage that might be missing there is unexplained, off camera, longer than 20 minutes has been deemed to have left the meeting type of scenario. Because I think I agree with Councillor Jeffrey that the overall burden is on individuals' own personal professionalism, but it could, in its worst case scenario, be warped into a unique way to get a checkbox for attendance without being fully present. Councillor Jeffrey touched on work-life balance, and there's two entirely different ways of viewing one's attendance. One is where one is present and fully engaged, and the other is where the council meeting is the background to other primary work duties. And this may well continue for some time. So I'm not prepared with language that speaks fully to that. I just want to share with fellow councillors that I think it can be certainly at its worst case scenario, an unusual way to gain a checkbox for attendance without being fully present. So I'm just going to leave those as comments. Thank you.
Just for clarification, Councillor Coleman, yeah, you had it started off with a question. Do you want that question answered? You were looking for a clarification on the word.
You know what? Thank you, Mayor Sonya. I do appreciate that. Clerk Almost, if you have anything you'd like to offer on what the net effect is of one's attendance in those circumstances, that's fine. But I don't want to put you on the spot if you're really not prepared to answer that. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
Thank you, Your Worship. Further to Councillor Comey's question, for the minute purposes and how we have the proposed wording would say we would request that members, we did provide a little bit of flexibility in the event that somebody has to immediately shut off their camera and can't advise the clerk. But we will be ensuring that appropriate training is provided on changes to the procedural bylaw, and one will be to encourage all members and all meetings, if for any reason you have to turn your camera off, that you advise the clerk or the recording secretary so it can be recorded in the minutes. And if they have to leave the meeting, then it would be acknowledged as such.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Councillor Madigan.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson, and I can appreciate everybody bringing this up. It's obvious this stems from me. For the last 7 years, I've probably made it to every meeting, but it's been commonly known that I work Tuesdays and Wednesdays in my store. So I will find out from Clerk Almas how I can send a message, but I can't afford to close my store to attend all meetings, and I've made it aggressively known that I would just thoroughly respect that no meetings are held on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, because I've made every other meeting except for those. And the last two, I was at them. I wasn't looking for an attendance check. I was listening through an earbud, but unfortunately, if I can't get to the camera, I respectfully keep it off. So it is not a shot at my personal business. And it shows respect, I thought, to my colleagues and to the public. I just wanted to let them know that I was in attendance and I care as much about this town as every one of my other colleagues that can attend the meetings, because for those days they might not have work commitments. I know we all work, but I do apologize, and I will reach out through the clerk off camera and through the mayor as well to find out what I can do, whether it's send a message very quickly typed or just put a card up that just says I have to go. But by no means did I mean it disrespectful to my colleagues or to any part of the agenda. And I'm sure that before we do the budget, that we'll be able to re-examine the one vote that I missed, that I'll be happy to vote on when time allows. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any other questions or comments? Councillor Hamlin.
Sorry about that. My screen moved. All right. Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, I have a question for Clerk Almas. The words that are proposed deal with remote participation. And it does strike me that we could be in the same situation if we were in an in-person meeting, because sometimes counselors, leave the room for various reasons and might miss a vote. So I'm just wondering if it's possible to, or if you think it's necessary to also include in-person meetings in this kind of resolution. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Clerk Thomas.
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. So this was specifically included under the electronic participation component of it, of our procedure bylaw. And I think when we're back meeting in person, obviously it would be easier to monitor attendance at that time. And yes, people have left the table. There has been votes happen, so it would just be reflected within the minutes. And I at this point, I don't see additional wording required in the bylaw pertaining to that.
Thank you.
Just a quick follow-up. Yeah, just a quick follow-up. So if we are in person, do our existing provisions of the procedural bylaw cover someone stepping out and missing a vote being taken?
Clerk Thomas.
It's not a provision within the procedure bylaw. The clerk just notes that the member has left the meeting and the member rejoined the meeting at whatever time, and the member did rejoin. So then you can ascertain whether the member was present for the vote or not.
Follow up, Councillor.
No, that's okay. Thank you.
Okay. Council, any other questions or comments on the procedural bylaw before I call the vote? I do have one, and so I'm going to pass the chair to Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson, and so asking for comments or questions regarding this item, and recognizing the mayor.
Thank you. Got to use that card. All right, and it's through you, Chair McLeod, to Clerk Almas, and it deals with section 2.2. And previously, and that's deals with under what circumstances we would be referring to Robert's Rules of Order for clarification. And previously, we did it only where there was, in the event of a conflict in the interpretation of any provision of this bylaw, referencing shall be made to Robert's Rules of Order for clarification. And now I think we're doing it where our bylaw is silent. And I think that causes me some concern, because Robert's Rules is fairly lengthy. And I think that having a procedural bylaw that governs our operations around our table, is sufficient. And I think by broadening it, it makes it perhaps unduly complicated. And we know the importance of our procedural bylaw. So I guess what I would like to see is that we maintain the status quo, which is that we would only refer to Robert's Rules of Order in the event of a conflict. So I'd like to put that on the floor as an amendment, Chair.
Thank you. And do you have a seconder? Councillor Madigan has seconded that. And some comments or questions regarding item 2.2 in the actual text of our procedural bylaw regarding conflict versus silence. Councillor Hamlin, I recognize you.
Yes, I just want to speak in favor of this. I had raised this particular concern when we discussed the amendments to the procedural bylaw. And thank you, Mr. Mayor, for bringing this forward as an amendment. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? And I have one. Clerk Almas, how much of a difference would this actually make? Do you know how often this would be used? I mean, obviously you can't read the future, but how often does 2.2 get employed in your experience, in your long experience here as clerk?
Thank you, Chair McLeod. Actually, we have not had to reference Robert's Rules. We have a very detailed procedure bylaw. So we haven't in the future that, or in the past, so it doesn't mean that we won't have to use it in the future.
Thank you very much. So seeing no other comments or questions on this item, I will call the vote on returning to the original or the previous iteration of item 2.2 in the text of our procedural bylaw. All those in favor? And those opposed? And that is carried. And I hand the chair back to Mayor Saunderson.
Thank you, Councillor McLeod. And then, so then I will call the vote then on the balance. And so I guess the main resolution would now read as amended. And that would be the only difference. So with that being said, unless there's any further comments or questions, I will call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. And that brings us then to item 10.3, a standing committee report from the Corporate and Community Services meeting of November 29, 2021. I'm going to sever out the OJLHL All-Star Game. So what I will do is read in the initial resolution without that item because I have a conflict on that matter. To be clear, it's not a pecuniary interest. It's a code of conduct conflict as I sit on the board. So the resolution with that item out of it reads that Council received the Corporate Community Services Standing Committee report from its meeting held November 29, 2021, and hereby approve the recommendations contained within the report as presented, starting with C 2021-18, Youth Engagement and Governance. And the resolution reads, Clerk to seek interest from members of Council, up to 3 members, to participate on an informal internal working group to explore options for youth engagement and governance and provide their recommendations through the Strategic Initiatives Committee not later than May 2022. Item C 2021-21, Town of Collingwood and Downtown Collingwood BIA Memorandum of Understanding. The resolution reads, authorize the execution of a memorandum of understanding between the Town of Collingwood and Downtown Collingwood Business Improvement Area. The next item is C 2021-22, update to business licensing review, food vendors. The resolution is temporarily suspend the issuance of 2022 business licenses to food vendors until August 30, 2022, and issue temporary extensions of 2021 business licenses with an expiration of April 30th, 2022 to food vendors currently operating and located on private property seeking to remain in the same location upon receipt of applications prior to December 31, 2021. And finally, C 2021-23 bylaw 94-66A, delegated authority to register payments. And the resolution reads that bylaw number 2021-81 being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 2020-59 to provide delegated authority to the treasurer or his/her delegate to undertake the issuance of certificate of payments or execution of an agreement for the acknowledgement of payment made under bylaw number 94-66A, and for said certificate of or agreement to be registered on title of the named property to be enacted and passed this 13th day of December 2021. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Madigan and Councillor Berman. Councillor, are there any of these items that you wish to pull for a change in direction? Seeing none, I know Keller, almost you had your hand up. Go ahead, Sarah, please.
Sorry, Your Worship. I noticed there's 2 other reports that are part of that resolution. 3, yes.
Yes.
Discrimination, yes.
My apologies, you're right. I think I was maybe just getting winded. So I will pick up where I left off. CCS 2021-2, Discrimination, Violence, and Harassment-Free Workplace Policy. And the recommendation reads, adopt a discrimination, violence, and harassment-free workplace policy number D-01. CCS 2021-04, remote work policy. The resolution is to adopt a remote work policy. And then the final one is CCS 2021-6, climate change update. And the resolution is to receive for information. So I will look to our movers and seconders to make sure that we've included all of those. And I've got their nod. Yes, thank you. Are there any items here that council wishes to pull for a change of direction? I've got Councillor Jeffrey, then Councillor Doherty, and Councillor Hamlin. Go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I'd like to pull the remote work policy CCS 2021-04, not necessarily for a change, but definitely an update from staff on an update in what I requested for the report on working from home.
All right, I've got that noted, so we will come back to that. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I also wanted to pull remote work policy for questions of clarification, not necessarily change direction, and also the climate change update for comment, please.
Okay. And Councillor Hamlin.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to pull C 2021-18, Youth Engagement and Governance. I have a comment and a question. Thank you.
Okay, so just for clarification, with Councillors Doherty and Hamlin, I know we're going to pull the remote work policy. The climate change, Councillor Doherty, is that for a comment, or do you want to change in direction?
No, sir, that is just for comment.
Just for comment. Okay, and we can certainly do that, and we'll deal with the vote first, and then I'll allow you to comment on that. And Councillor Hammond, for the youth engagement, did you have any, you want to change in direction or just a comment?
Just a comment and a question, not a change in direction.
Okay, all right. So what I'm going to do is pull the remote work policy one, and I'm going to call the vote to receive the remainder. And then I will allow questions on the climate change and youth engagement items, and then we'll go back to the remote work policy. So with that being said, I'm going to call the vote then to receive all the items that I have read out finally in their entirety, save and except for the first item, which I left out. All right, all in favor? Okay, so that's carried unanimously. So Councillor Doherty, I'll go to you for your comment on the climate change policy.
Yes, thank you, Worship. And really, this was just to congratulate staff for this report. Seeing as we have not had a climate change specialist on staff until just very recently, it was very difficult to know as member of council what was being done on a day-to-day basis to advance this council's concern about climate change. And I see that there are a number of excellent initiatives there, more coming. Certainly there's lots of work to be done, but I'm very encouraged by what I saw in that report.
Thanks for that. I don't know if our manager Yardy is with us tonight to maybe comment, or CAO, if you have anything to add to that.
Thank you, Your Worship. Executive Director Peg and I are really pleased with this, and we know council wants to drive forward, and so do we. And we certainly saw them, people commenting from the public and from the Collingwood Climate Action Team that they had a priority for this work in from immediately now moving forward. So it's good to hear, and thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to staff and Treasurer Quinlan for updating the budget to show the items, because we had a lot of questions from our community and our climate action team about what action had been taken and what action is outlined and contained in the budget. So thank you for that clarification. And it is a very exciting initiative, and we're looking forward to it. Councillor Hamlin, I will go to you on the youth engagement item.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, my printer's going. It'll stop in a minute. I wanted to comment on this because I was so pleased to see this come forward at the standing committee. And I wanted to just really quickly advise council that, and I guess I know you know, Mr. Mayor, but in 2019 into early 2020, I hosted several meetings here in the council boardroom all about youth and youth governance. And I just wanted to let staff and council know that who was participating at that time was Lee Pankhurst, who's the manager of our youth center, two of their board members, Roz who of course leads our Institute of Southern Georgian Bay. There was a management person level person from Ontario Nonprofit Network who had grown up in Thornbury and was very keen and had lots of ideas. And also, I think the last meeting we had, the executive director of the United Way for Simcoe Muskoka was participating. And where we were when COVID hit, when everything stopped, is the Collingwood Youth Center was in fact creating their own system of how they wanted to engage with Collingwood Council, and they were going to come forward with suggestions. So I just really wanted to bring that to everyone's attention, that there's been some work done. Now the youth at the youth center are only up to, I guess, the end of high school age, and youth might be considered up to the age 29. So we've maybe got a bit broader mandate that could be looked at, and I appreciate all that. Of course, our former CAO was up to speed on these meetings and so on, but as I say, everything came to a stop with COVID. So that was my comment. And in terms of my question, I was just wondering, the recommendation is for an internal working group. And through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm just wondering, does that mean staff and the 3 councillors, up to 3 councillors that the resolution mentions?
I'll look to Clerk Collins to answer that. Go ahead, Sarah.
That's correct, through your worship, to Councillor Hamlin.
Okay, thank you. That was all. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so then I'm going to go back to the remote work policy, which is CCS 2021-4, remote work policy, and the resolution was to adopt the remote work policy. So I'm going to pass you, Councillor Jeffrey, to pose your questions, and then we'll go from there.
Well, thank you, Mayor Saunderson, and with your permission, I was wondering if Executive Director Peg could maybe update us on the resolve or coverage for us in terms of liability for health and safety and WSIB and all those important things for staff that are working remotely. I think it's an important part for council to be considering in the approval of this remote work policy. And so I'm hoping that she's in attendance so that she or someone else could do that.
Oh, there's Amanda now, so I'm going to pass it over to Executive Director Peg.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Jeffrey and Council. So the town does have comprehensive and legislatively compliant policies and procedures in place that govern the employment relationship, including health and safety, all of which would continue to apply in a remote setting. So regardless to where an employee is working, those policies would continue to apply. In addition, the remote work agreement that's an appendix to the policy does have some considerations around health and safety and the requirement for employees to comply with our corporate policies. In regards to WSIB, WSIB does have a clear policy on determining if an accident is considered to be in the course of employment. And their policy speaks to 3 main components. So the place, time, and the activity that was being completed at the time of the incident. And for the purposes of remote work, the place looks at where the employee physically is within their space when the accident occurred. So am I in my garage, up on, a ledge and I fall down, not the course of my employment. I'm a desk worker. That place would not be considered as place of work for the purposes of WSIB. The time that the incident occurred, so if it was after hours and I was conducting my personal business, that would not be covered, and the activity. So if an injury happens while the worker's engaged in the performance of work-related duties, so I'm at my desk and something happens, WSIB would apply in the same way that it would if I was physically in a town-owned facility. So WSIB does have a very robust policy about this, and they certainly don't apply it in a blanket context. So they would do a case-by-case analysis of the circumstances that led to the injury to determine if WSIB applied. And in addition to that, in terms of other insurance considerations, employees that are working remote, the onus and responsibility is on them to contact their personal insurance provider and notify them that they are working in a remote setting to ensure that their policy is reflective of that. And the employee would then, therefore, if there was an increase in premium rates, would be responsible for that difference. And speaking with CAO Skinner about this, we did acknowledge that having a affirmation from employees would be a critical component, that they have in fact contacted their insurance provider and notified them that they were working in a remote setting. And that's something that we would certainly add to that remote work agreement to ensure that that extra level of protection is there. So I hope that answers the question, but if there's anything else I can speak to, I'd be happy to. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director. Any follow-up, Councillor?
Thank you very much. And through you, Mayor Saunderson. So thank you for that important information. So only really two quick questions. Do we inspect the remote work location to satisfy ourselves, or does that matter? And then the second question is, I know you said WSIB isn't a blanket coverage, so where does the town's liability fall in there if WSIB doesn't cover that injury? Most likely, if it's not applicable to WSIB, it may not be applicable to us, but I just, as a director, want to be sure that I'm covering off all of our liability situations. Thank you.
Thank you. Executive Director.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Councillor Jeffrey. So in terms of an inspection of the workplace, supporting documents to a remote policy, there is a number of remote procedures that would be put in place, which would include a health and safety checklist that employees would need to complete for their workspace. In addition, in the remote work agreement, they are agreeing to abide by all town policies and procedures, which include having a safe workspace and reporting any hazards, et cetera. And certainly if there was an instance where an employee was not complying with those policies and procedures and their duty to complete those health and safety checklists, they would be subject to our progressive discipline policy. We absolutely take health and safety very seriously, whether you're working remotely or in the workplace. In terms of WSIB, and if an injury was not deemed to be work-related, it would fall within the employee's own personal liability, and that's where the component of having adequate health insurance would be of the utmost importance.
Follow-up, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. So then just my last question is, that's great because I think those are all terrific procedures. Should those procedures be included as an amendment to the report, or do we simply just say staff carry on, make sure it happens, and we know that they all happen?
Okay, I guess I'll look to Executive Director Peg. Do you need any direction from Council to implement the items you've been talking about, or will those be included as part of the remote work policy as it stands?
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Councillor Jeffrey. I am confident in staff's ability to implement the procedures that are related to this policy. We've had extensive discussion around remote work and our duties that relate to it at the department head level. CO Skinner also has experience from her previous roles with the province working in remote work, and I too have experience from Town of Innisfil implementing remote work programs. So I'm confident between us and the leadership of the department head team that we can successfully implement those procedures.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Doherty, I think you also had some concerns about the remote work policy. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Worship. And yes, I had a number of questions, and I was just seeking clarification. The first, and I think very important question is, does a remote work policy apply to the position, or does it apply to the individual in that position? because I think that has implications as subsequent individuals are hired.
Executive Director.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Doherty. So eligibility for remote work programs can actually be looked at through both perspectives. So both from an individual and a position. So for example, a position, in order to be considered at all, a position must be eligible. So there are certain roles that would be conducive to a remote work framework, and there's certain roles that are not. And I think the easiest example would be a firefighter. That role would not be eligible for remote work based on the type of service that they deliver. That said, so once a role was determined to be eligible, it then moves to the individual level. So in order to be eligible for remote work, an individual would need to meet the criteria that's set out within the policy. So for example, they must have completed a probationary period, have a positive performance review, have a established performance plan on file that's been signed off on by management. And they must be meeting, if not exceeding, current service expectations within their role. So it is, those two components are certainly considered in tandem and aren't mutually exclusive.
Follow up, Councillor.
Yes, thank you. So what I'm hearing is that it would almost be applied on sort of a case-by-case basis. But based on the application of the employee.
Through your worship to Councillor Doherty. So each circumstance would be viewed on a case by case. So as an application came forward, that said, as roles are identified as being eligible for remote work and the program matures, we may identify roles that would benefit from either a remote or hybrid work arrangement going forward. It would certainly be something, as well as roles became vacant, that we would examine if there has been opportunity to pilot remote in that position, if we would move forward with posting that role with a hybrid or remote option. So I guess to answer the question, it would be case by case, but with a larger lens in terms of what is the global benefit of that role being remote in terms of accommodation planning and some of the other benefits that are referenced within that report.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, thank you, Your Worship. So yes, thank you for addressing the notion of successors, because that was also a question in my mind. So you alluded to accommodations, and my concern with a remote work, particularly a hybrid model, is that one of the advantages that we see with a remote work policy is our ability to find cost savings in our accommodation strategy for our employees. And if we have hybrid workers, how can we predict how much space we need for our employees?
Executive Director.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Doherty. So our fleet and facilities team has been hard at work running various different scenarios that take into consideration a percentage of employees working remotely and how that percentage would then have an impact on our accommodation needs. That said, cost savings would certainly be achieved through options like hoteling stations. So that's an instance where, say, you have 5 employees that work remote, but would have instances where it would be beneficial for them to come into the office. They would book out a workspace and be able to use that space while they were at the office. In addition, we have been piloting shared workspaces through COVID. So whether that's a shared office, where employees have a schedule where they would use that office in order at this time for physical distancing, but certainly post-COVID. And January 1st, as directed by council, that would not be a consideration. So I'll just add to that some organizations do have policies or frameworks in place that indicate that employees would have a shared office 2 to 3 days per week. So they're scheduled to be working remote those days. And that's offset by someone using that same office on the other days. So based on those considerations and analysis, we have identified that there would be opportunities for cost savings through the implementation of remote work and benefiting accommodations.
Councillor.
Yes, thank you. So notwithstanding those questions, I'm generally in support of this recommendation. There certainly are many, many advantages to offering our employees the option if it works out. But these questions popped up that I just couldn't clearly see the answer to. So thank you.
All right, Councillor, are there any other questions or comments on the remote work policy? It is on the floor and we have a mover and a seconder. So then I will call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. So that brings us back then to the first item, and I will pass the chair to Councillor McLeod to lead this portion. Thank you.
Thank you. And so the piece of the report from the Corporate and Community Services Standing Committee meeting is concerning the OJHL All-Star Game on January the 14th of 2022. The Collingwood Blues hockey team made a deputation to the committee. And the motion that came to the table was to waive the ice rental fee at the Eddie Bush Arena for the 2-day OJHL All-Star Weekend event, and that the town provide in-kind communication support to promote the event. So in the absence of the mayor, who has a thank you, I'm looking for a mover and seconder. Moved by Councillor Madigan and seconded by Councillor Berman, who I believe actually those were the original movers and seconders at the meeting. And I'll look for comments and questions from any member of council. And seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Thank you very much. And I will invite the mayor to return to the meeting, and we'll relinquish the chair.
Thank you, Councillor McLeod. So this brings us then to item 10.4, which is the Standing Committee report from the Special Strategic Initiatives meeting of November 30, 2021. And 10.4.1 reads as follows. The Council received the Special Strategic Initiatives Standing Committee report from its meeting held November 30, 2021 as presented, and that was our special budget virtual public consultation. Can I get a mover and a seconder to put that on the floor, please? Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Berman. Are there any questions or comments before I call the vote? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. And 10.5, Standing Committee report from our Special Strategic Initiatives meeting of December 7, 2021. And this one is rather lengthy. So the resolution reads, the Council received the Special Strategic Initiative Standing Committee report from its meeting held December 7, 2021, and hereby approve the recommendations contained within the report as presented. CCS 2021-7, Grain Terminals Project Status and Built Heritage Assessment Report. The resolution reads, direct staff to provide the Built Heritage Assessment completed by Archaeological Research Associates Limited to the Grain Terminal Advisor, redevelopment and alternative financing, which is yet to be awarded, to provide advice and guidance on how to best incorporate these findings into the next stages of the Grain Terminals project as identified in the white paper. Second item is C 2021-25, considerations re current council member leave of absence and potential mayoral vacancy, and that report was deferred. And T 2021-24, 2022 development charges, which is to receive for information. Report T 2021-23, 2022 municipal third draft budget, and the direction to move forward to a budget public meeting on December 13th, 2021. Final report, C 2021-17, 2021 Collingwood Code of Conduct for members of council, committees, and local boards, and Collingwood Code of Conduct for advisory committees and task forces with feedback. The recommendation is approved. The Town of Collingwood Code of Conduct for members of council and local boards, and the Collingwood Code of Conduct for advisory committees and task force. I get a mover and a seconder to get that on the floor, please. Councillor Berman, Councillor Hamlin. And I'm going to look, is there any item that council would like to pull for a change in direction? Councillor Jeffrey, I think you spoke at the outset of this meeting on the considerations for the leave of absence.
Mayor Saunders, I think it reappears because it was deferred at that meeting. It's under other business. I believe it's 16.1 is where I'm assuming I'll be able to address it.
Yes, you'll be able to address it then. Okay. Are there any other items, council? Seeing none, then I'll call the vote then. All in favor? And now that we've received it, are there any items that anyone would like to pull just for a comment or question? Seeing none, then we will move to staff reports. 11.1 P 2021-37 Raglan Street Water Treatment Plant Deeming Bylaw. And the resolution reads that staff report P 2021-37 Raglan Street (Water Treatment Plant) and Deeming Bylaw be received, and the bylaw number 2021-88 being a bylaw to designate a plan of subdivision or part thereof not to be a registered plan of subdivision for the purposes of subsection 50 sub 3 of the Planning Act be enacted and passed this 13th day of December 2021. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Madigan and Councillor Berman, thank you. And I think I'm going to look to Director Ballantyne to give us some background on this particular bylaw. Go ahead, Summer, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I do have a very brief summary of the report, which does actually tie in quite nicely to the earlier presentation provided by CAO Skinner, Director Slama, and her team. And it's primarily a housekeeping matter that would assist in facilitating the expansion of the town's water treatment plant. Today, the town-owned lands forming the site of the existing water treatment plant are actually made up of 6 lots created through a quite an old plan of subdivision. And in order to appropriately redevelop those lands without crossing lot lines and causing zoning bylaw or urban design administration issues, merging those parcels is considered desirable and would assist in our continued efforts to ensure that this project can be expedited. The mechanism to merge the lots in these older plans of subdivision under the Planning Act is to pass a deeming bylaw, which is before you tonight, and subsequently consolidate the property identification numbers, which would result in 1 parcel of land. This application was circulated to internal and external agencies, and there was no concerns raised, and therefore staff are recommending that the deeming bylaw be passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Ballantyne. Council, any questions or comments? Seeing none, then I will call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. And that takes us to 12.1, the bylaws, and the resolution reads that bylaw number 2021-89 being a bylaw to provide for the 2022 interim tax levy be enacted and passed this 13th day of December 2021. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Hamlin, Councillor Berman. Are there any questions or comments, council, before I call a vote? I will just look to Treasurer Quinlan just to confirm that this is a standard procedural bylaw, just to make sure that we have it in place. And I'll get that to confirm that, please, Monica.
Yes, Your Worship, through you to members of council, you're correct. It is just a standard bylaw. The first tax bill that's issued in 2022 will be 50% of the previous year's tax bills. And we do this every year.
Good. Thank you. All right, then. Seeing no further questions or comments, I will call the vote then. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. And that brings us to item 13, which is motions, 13.1. And the motion reads that council direct the CAO and treasurer to finalize the 2022 budget for consideration at the regular meeting of council scheduled for December 20, 2021. I get a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Berman and Councillor Hamlin. Council, any questions or comments before I call the vote? Go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Ms. Saunderson. So this is where, if we want to, we can still make motions with respect to the budget before it goes to its final draft.
Yes.
Perfect. So I would like to bring back the matter of the hiring of the communications person for $80,000. My initial instinct is to eliminate it and try to show some restraint given the amount of staff that's been hired. But in the last 4 years at 30 full-time equivalent jobs. But I think in the interest of trying to be conciliatory, that I would like to propose that while we hire the communications person for $80,000, it would be contingent on council approving a communications plan prior to hiring, and failing an agreeable communications plan, that the funds would revert to the Affordable Housing Task Force reserve. I believe really strongly that we really need to be doing a better job in, not a better job. We have excellent staff, but we have riches of staff. And I think that it's really important that this communications person be specifically targeted to a council approved communications plan. Thank you. And Councillor Berman was willing to second that. So.
I will come to that. I'm just going to look to staff. Director Valentine, perhaps you could comment on that for us, and then I will look for a seconder to get on the floor. Oh, sorry, not Director Valentine, Executive Director Peggy. My apologies, Summer. Go ahead, Amanda.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Jeffrey and to Council. Certainly, it would be our intent with a new position to develop a robust communication strategy and communications plan. We have identified a imminent need to do this. It would be our preference, of course, to have the support on hand to start managing the day-to-day so that the communications manager could right away begin focusing on this strategy development and plan. But staff, of course, would be prepared to move forward based on the direction of council.
Thank you for that. Councillor Berman, you're prepared to second this? Good. We've got it on the floor. Council, questions or comments? Councillor Madigan.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy that this came back. This was part of a vote that I unfortunately missed at an earlier meeting due to my job commitments, and I would have voted yes on behalf of this. I do agree that we need a definite communication strategy, but I'm going to leave that up to our staff to present it because I have trust in them that the professionals will give us the guidance. But I'm really, really happy to see this come back, and I will be 100% supporting this.
All right. Are there any other questions or comments, Council, before I call the vote? Councillor Coney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Jeffrey, could you kindly clarify? I lost you on the part with funds going into the Affordable Housing Task Force. I just lost it a bit on that.
Mayor Saunderson? Yeah, thank you. Yes, I think in my mind that if council cannot come to an agreement in terms of what that communication strategy needs to be, that the money wouldn't just fall back into the budget unused, that it would go into affordable housing reserve. But that's only a backup to council and not coming to an agreement with respect to the communications plan, which is highly unlikely, but a possibility. But the date of March 31st is there, so there's an impetus to get going on it.
Councillor Coney?
Please, so through you, Mr. Mayor, just to clarify, but this is a vote in support of the position that's been requested with a little caveat of ifs and buts. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I will be in support of this.
Councillor McLeod and Councillor Ham.
Thank you. And so we're making the position, this yet another additional position, contingent on council approval of the plan that is going to come forward. So okay, thank you. I see all the nodding. Thank you.
Councillor Ham.
Just a comment, Mr. Mayor. I'm in favor of this position. I'm not in favor of caveats around it. I feel this is interfering in the job of our staff. I believe that we need communication improvement, and I even have heard this from residents. So I am no expert in communications, that's for sure, but I think that we do need this position. And I appreciate the comments that have been made, but I don't think that I need to approve any particular plan for a particular staff person. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions or comments, Council? Seeing none, I think this is a very important position, and I think having a communication strategy is important. I'd like to see this come back to Council. I have no doubt it would be an excellent strategy, but I'd like to know how we're investing and what the job description for this person will be. I'm absolutely in support of this. And with that being said, I will call the vote. All in favor? And opposed? So noted, and that is carried. Thank you. And that will bring us back then to the main motion, unless there's any other amendments or requests. Councillor Doherty.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I was very disappointed that the Maple Street bikeway was removed from the budget. I just wanted to ask through you of Director Slama, what are the implications for this project going forward into 2022?
Okay, and just to clarify, it was not removed. What we have asked is that staff come back with the pilot project results, and all the funds for this project were going to be grant driven. And we've asked county staff to come back with the report, at which time Council, based on the report, would then instruct staff to move forward with the grant applications. So I'll pass it on to Director Slama.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think that you've spoken well to the item. That is the intention of staff.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Councillor?
No, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Comey.
My mouth is being very uncooperative tonight. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a mess. Through Mayor Saunderson, to Director Slama, I guess, grants are very time sensitive. So I think the only unfortunate part, and I'm just offering comment about the delay, is that we could find ourselves just behind a whole cycle. So all the grants that would have married up beautifully to this opportunity will now be contingent on a series of timings of committee meetings and agendas, and we might be delayed. Would it be reasonable to think that, we're just at the mercy of the grants that align with this and the timing they're in of the applications and their approvals? Are we saying essentially the whole thing will be contingent upon successful grant applications? Or does it fall under some of those big FCM green initiative type grants, transportation type grants? Is there an umbrella of opportunities, or are they little tiny things we have to go one by one? Thank you.
Go ahead, Director Slama.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through the Mayor to Councillor Comey. So at this time, staff continue to look at the funding opportunities that would be available for a project of this nature. And any information that we have found, we will present at the time of our staff report. So there is that possibility that we are at the mercy of being approved for an applicable grant. I see that Director Quinlan also has her camera on, so I'm not sure, Director Quinlan, if you have a certain fund in mind.
Treasurer Quinlan.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Comey. I think one thing that was just important to mention is although we did remove it, it was fully grant dependent, and there wasn't a grant lined up specifically to lend itself to this particular project. So what we've been doing on an ongoing basis as new grant programs come through, we review them at department heads and try and figure out the right fit if there's projects out there. So certainly if there became an opportunity, we would raise it with Director Slama and then, proceed with whatever sort of needs to happen at that point. So at this point, I just wanted to clarify that we didn't have a particular grant opportunity in mind.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Councillor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I guess just to offer the comment, I feel concerned, then not through any doing on staff's part, but it can be so tricky for the sun and the moon to align on these opportunities and the timing they're in. This was so now I'm offering a comment on the project. It was so well used. There were so many mornings I was tempted to take video footage of the students using it, but out of a regard to respect the privacy of youth in particular, that I didn't. But it's just, and I look forward to that report from staff. It was absolutely so well used. Children and like our youth at CCI just delighted in the freedom and security that came from allowing them to go down those streets without the extra, burden and worry. And now I observe it gone. And again, I don't take the video footage, but I watch them juggling a myriad of obstacles that obviously didn't exist before. So I thank you to staff, and fingers crossed that a wonderful opportunity presents itself that makes this an absolute no-brainer. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I don't know if Councillor Doherty or Councillor Comey wanted to put an amendment on the table with respect to this item. All right, then we'll get back to the main motion. So then the main motion is that Council direct the CAO and Treasurer to finalize the 2022 budget for consideration at the regular meeting of Council scheduled for December 20, 2021. And we've had good discussion, so I will call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. That brings us to item 14 and notices of motion. And Councillor Jeffrey, I believe you have a notice of motion.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I do. And it's regarding Minister's zoning order to expedite potential locations of affordable housing. That Council directs staff to investigate and report back regarding the ability to use the Minister's zoning order and MZO to expedite the potential locations of affordable housing.
Thank you. So that will come up next week at our December 20 meeting. That brings us then to item 15, which is the county report. And I thought I would give a quick update to Council on two items, really. One flows from the other, but the 2022 budget was passed by County Council in our last meeting in November. And they passed a budget of $638 million in total, 132 million in capital and $506 million in operating. It should be noted that of that total amount, 192 million comes from taxes, is tax generated. The balance comes from user fees and grants, government grants, upper level grants by the province and to some degree the federal government for some of the bigger initiatives. Just to give an idea, in terms of working together for the greater good, the Simcoe County Hospital Alliance has made, or the county has made a $3 million contribution to the Simcoe County Hospital Alliance. And that will be a big funder for our hospital project. It's a 15-year commitment of $45 million and 20 million has been directed to come to Collingwood, the CGMH redevelopment when that gets approval. We put $1.5 million towards post-secondary capital support, $500,000 towards hospice capital funding. So similar to the Hospital Alliance, we have created a hospice alliance and we are contributing $500,000 annually to the Hospice Alliance for sharing throughout the hospices in Simcoe County. $6.4 million to the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit, $600,000 to the Age Friendly Grant, and $500,000 to the YMCA initiative. In terms of engineering, planning, and environment, we're putting towards $57 million towards transportation and engineering, $77 million towards solid waste management. In health and emergency services, there's $104 million going to long-term care and senior services, and $64 million towards paramedic services. In terms of social and community services, where $46 million is earmarked for children's services, and 14 million for community services, including homelessness prevention and local immigration partnership. In terms of social housing, $102 million is going towards social housing, and that will be going towards our 10-year affordable housing strategy. And just by way of an update, there are approximately 3,946 community housing units within the county's housing portfolio, of which 2,700 are rent geared to income. And the capital budget for 2022 includes rental development projects as well as capital repair projects to maintain our existing housing infrastructure. And $88 million is going to Ontario Works in the upcoming year. This represents an increase of 2% in the rate levy, or the tax rate, over last year, which was held at 0. And 2% averages or means about a $5.47 increase per $100,000 of assessment for our residents in Simcoe County. And I thought I would just give an update on the affordable housing strategy, given that we have our own internal task force in Collingwood. And there are a number of housing units in Simcoe County. We're in our 8th year of the attainable or affordable housing strategy. The goal is to create close to 2,700 new units in the 10 years, and we're currently at 2,443 new affordable housing units created since January. There are a number of housing complexes, including the one in Collingwood, which has 147 units. There's one in Wasaga Beach that has 99 units. And there's one in Tay Township, which has 41 units. So that's 287 units in the north end of the county, created in the last 5 years at a cost of approximately $95 million. In the south end of the county, there is a project on the books for Bradford West Gwillimbury. And Bradford West Gwillimbury has donated the land, and it will be a 130 unit housing complex. There is a proposed unit down in Barrie on Rose Street, which would see the creation of a 150 unit building. And that has yet to be approved by either the county council or the Barrie council. And there is an approved build on the books for 125 units in Aurelia. So over time, that will see the creation of 320 units in the south end of the county, but those have yet to be built. So the attainable and affordable housing piece is a big piece across the county. It has been for a number of years, but has become acute given the recent COVID pandemic, as well as other social factors. And it is a priority for county council as well as for the local municipal councils. So those were the 2 updates I wanted to provide today. And I'm happy to take any questions. Councillor McLeod, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. We had a conversation here as well at this council table about the MCR, and I wonder if you might be able to speak a little bit about the meeting that you and I attended regarding that.
Yes, certainly. There was a county session that was held last Thursday, I think, Wednesday or Thursday, and we had a number of consultants come in and speak to county council about the MCR process. On a number of fronts, certainly dealing with the allocation targets or distribution throughout the county. Our population is slated to grow by, I think, 150 or 170,000 in that period. So our population will go from right now, I think we're at about 300,000 up to 550,000, I think, by the 2031 timeline. And so that was a topic of discussion. There was certainly a lot of concern from municipalities like our own that feel we're getting too much in terms of allocation as compared to other municipalities like Clearview Township and Agilatoss-Orontiel that are getting very little. And so the nuts and bolts concern for those municipalities is what's their business plan? If you don't have growth and you're not growing your tax base, how do you pay the bills? And so that's a very real concern for many of the municipalities. And we're on the other end of that scale where we see our infrastructure being overtaxed, causing us to incur significant expenses, plus the impacts on our community in terms of growth and density and all that comes with that, from traffic congestion and speeds and local character. So there was a discussion about that. Natural heritage features was a discussion as well. And we are served in our community by the NBCA, so they would be handling that portion, but there are other municipalities in Simcoe County that aren't served by conservation authorities, so those issues for them were a concern. For the agricultural communities, agricultural mapping and designation is a key consideration. I guess in a nutshell, we're seeing some very prime agricultural land in the south end of county that is being consumed by development, whereas there are development restrictions on agricultural lands that aren't nearly as great quality in our northern areas. And so they're concerned about their ability to handle growth as well. And the final item, I know what, I've lost it, Councillor McLeod. Perhaps you can fill it in for me. I know there was 4 topics. I've covered 3. And what was the 4th that I'm missing?
I've lost the 4th one too.
Okay. In any event, there was good discussion, and this is very much an in-process, an in-action process in terms that it's ongoing. And this was really an update to explain to county council members and the public what the process looks like, where we are in the process. And as you know, we have provided some comments to the county in terms of our opinion of the allocation numbers. And so that's ongoing, and a second draft will be coming back, and there will be further public engagement. So I'm happy to keep council apprised of that, but it's a big topic. It's clearly a critical topic, and it's ongoing. And if there's no questions, then I'll brings us to item 16.1, which is older deferred business. And item 16.1.1 is consideration re current council member leave of absence and potential mayoral vacancy. And if they're in camera is required, we can do that. Right now, the resolution reads that staff report C 2021-25 considerations re current council member leave of absence and potential mayoral vacancy be received. And further, the council approve the recommendations contained herein as follows. Leave of absence. 1, county council, the current alternate be designated the authority of the deputy mayor. BIA director, that the clerk continue to participate in board functions as appropriate during the interim and act as the liaison, round bracket, not a voting member of the board, end bracket, pending input from the BIA Board of Management. 3, Affordable Housing Task Force, an interim replacement is not required. 4, official town signatory, staff be directed to prepare the necessary bylaw to appoint the highest elected member of council as an official signatory of the municipality to act in the absence of the mayor and or deputy mayor. And 5, Development and Operations Services Standing Committee. Option 1 is to appoint a temporary replacement to the DNO Standing Committee, or option 2, not fill the DNO Standing Committee vacancy and reevaluate at the end of February. Seat vacancy. In the event that a council seat becomes vacant, council authorize staff to immediately proceed with a call for interest from current members of council interested in filling the vacancy for council's consideration, prior to a call for other eligible candidates from the public to fill the vacancy for the remainder of the council term, round bracket, until November 14, 2022, end bracket, for council's consideration. Can I get a mover and a seconder to get this on the table, please? Councillor Madigan, Councillor McLeod. I'm going to look to Clerk Almas first to see if you have more comments on this before we start to open the floor to questions from council. Go ahead, please, Sarah.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can provide an update to council on a couple of items. First of all, we received clarification regarding the council vacancy. Should it happen in June, there is a possibility that if a current member of council is interested in a position and council chooses to appoint an existing member to the vacant seat, that council could make the appointment following the July 26, 2022 date that requires or provides discretion to council to not fill a vacant seat. So a member of council would have to be appointed, declaring their seat vacant if they were appointed. And if that vacancy is declared during that period after July 26, then council could choose whether they wish to fill that vacancy or not at that time. Additionally, the BIA board did have a meeting last Thursday in which the board was satisfied with not having a council member replacement on that board. They're enjoying the work that the deputy mayor has been doing with the board, and would hope to see his return whenever he returns to council. And those are the primary updates. If this report is to be deferred this evening, if it's an unknown time period, I would request that the signatory direction be proceeded on as sooner than later. And that's it.
Good. Thank you very much, Sarah. Comments, questions, council? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. The only parts I would request to be deferred is the seat vacancy portion of this report. I think items 1, which our alternate is already Councillor McLeod, that's in our process. So that to me is all we're doing in number 1, correct? It's just confirming that Councillor McLeod would be attending county as the alternate.
Go ahead. Sarah, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. So we do have bylaw 2017-097 in place. So if Councillor McLeod is appointed to fill the authority of the deputy mayor, then that bylaw kicks in, and then the next highest elected member of council would take that seat in accordance with that bylaw. If council wishes to provide an alternate recommendation, then we'd have to amend the bylaw before making that appointment.
Follow up, Councillor Jeffrey.
Not just this 1 second. I'm going through them. So the BIA is okay. The Affordable Housing Task Force is okay. Signatory is essential. And DevOp, I would propose option 2, definitely deferring seat vacancy, and potentially number 1, because I believe Councillor McLeod can act for the deputy mayor at the county until we have more clarity on the deputy mayor's return to council. Is that correct?
Well, I think, as I understood Clerk Almus's commentary, under the existing bylaw, Councillor McLeod steps up, and then the next top vote getter, Councillor Comey, would then step in as the designated alternate in the event that either myself or Councillor McLeod is unable to attend the county meeting between now and the hopeful return of the deputy mayor.
All right. Well, for this minute only, then pending hearing from my other colleagues, for now, I'd just like to defer the seat vacancy until we have more information on the return of the deputy mayor, and it gives us some time to think about it. I think this is too big a meeting to be trying to take in all of this with updated recommendations, and I don't think it's necessary that we have that tonight.
Okay, we'll go around the table, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor, for a deferral, and then I think you'd mentioned option 2, so I'll come back to you to put that on the floor as well. Council, any other questions or comments? Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. This just dawned on me this minute. There's one more thing that Deputy Mayor Hall sits on, which is SCADA.
And that is the county group, and I don't know how frequently they meet. Can you speak to that, Clerk Almus?
Certainly. Thank you, Your Worship. That is a good question. Currently, Jennifer Parker sits on that committee now, basically on behalf of the municipality, and the deputy mayor hasn't been, he still receives, I think, the communications, but he doesn't attend those meetings.
Okay.
Thank you. No, that's fine. I was thinking of all the things I might be assigned. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments, Council? Councillor Comey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through your quick comments, I just have I guess, like a procedural question or clarification. Is the report we've received this evening amended from the report that was first presented at SIC?
Thank you. That is correct. After we received clarification regarding the from the lawyer regarding the basically the overlap time period for the council vacancies, we noted that we could end up with a vacant seat at the table if it happens after July 26th. And the original recommendation didn't address if there was a current existing member of council that wishes to take the other member's seat should a vacancy occur. And also the original report, I spoke to it at the meeting, but it wasn't addressed in the report, was the recommendation pertaining to the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee.
Follow-up, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess my only observation was in the agenda package itself, it wasn't noted as amended, and then it wasn't immediately, like I see it was noted here. I suppose procedurally, my comment is it just surprised me because this whole thing was just straight up deferred from SIC, so I just wasn't able to follow how it became to be deferred and then put before us again in an amended form is the only thing that tripped me up. And then just offering the comment, there's nothing in the hard agenda itself that speaks to the fact this is an amended report.
Any comments, clear comments?
Sorry, in the agenda package, page 601 out of 610 pages of our agenda today has the amended report in it, which clearly notes that it is amended. But as for the summary, my apologies if that was not noted that it was amended.
And I use, so pardon me, through me, Mr. Mayor, I use soft copy, right? So I'm on Compass. So on my agenda page, 16.1, there's nothing here that speaks to the fact what's attached is amended, but I absolutely note that it does say amendments, yes. And I just procedurally wasn't aware that if a report is deferred, it could come back to us in an amended form. I thought it just straight up stopped once we deferred it. So I just appreciated that clarification.
Yes, well, I think any report can be updated based on information that comes in between the time it's received at a committee and the time it comes back before council. So, subject to anything Clerk Almus has to say, I think it's standard operating procedure that if new information comes to light, council will be made aware of that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this issue, council? Seeing none, then I'm going to go back to you, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I would simply like to defer the seat vacancy portion of the report until we have clarification on the Deputy Mayor's return.
Okay, so what I'm going to suggest is we sever that portion, and then perhaps Councillor Jeffrey, with respect to the balance of the main motion, do you want to put option 2 on the table with respect to item number 5? And I'll look for a seconder for that, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, Councillor Hamlin, thank you. So then first what I'm going to do is deal with item 5. And this is Development and Operations Services Standing Committee. And Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Hamlin have put option 2, which is to not fill the DNO Standing Committee vacancy and reevaluate at the end of February. Are there any questions or comments on that item before I call the vote? Seeing none. Councillor Madigan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Sorry, I just got caught on the other card. It's obvious that I put my name forward for it because Clerk Almus mentioned it at our last meeting. I was the chair of the committee, but if everybody wants to have a committee within the town of Collingwood, it could potentially be a stalemate at 2-2 every meeting, then I look forward to the vote.
Okay, duly noted. Council, any other questions or comments on this before I call the vote? Councillor Berman.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Just through you to the clerk, how many DNO meetings would there be? I'm guessing 2 between now and the end of February. And is the end of February when the next election, sorry, through Mayor Saunderson to you again, would the end of February be when the elections for chair and vice chair? Does this coincide with it when we talk about reevaluating?
Correct.
Thank you.
All right, council, any other questions or comments on this before I call the vote? Seeing none, we're voting on option 2 for item 5, the DNO Standing Committee. All in favor? And opposed? Duly noted, and that is carried. And then dealing with the seat vacancy, Councillor Jeffrey, do you have a seconder for your deferral motion? Councillor Berman, any questions or, well, it's a deferral, so there are no questions or comments on it. I will simply call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. We've dealt with that. So that brings us then to 16.2, other business. Go ahead, Clerk Almus. Did I forget the main motion?
Yes.
All right. Thank you for that. All right, council. So we have the main motion, which deals with items 1 through 5. And we deferred the item seat vacancy. So it will be, since we've got option 2, it would be then as amended. So we've got this on the floor. So are there any other questions or comments? We had a good discussion with respect to these items. Seeing none, then I will call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. And then I think now I can move to 16.2, other business. Council, any other business tonight? Councillor Madigan.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. And I was going to bring this up under notice as the motion, but I'm not, because I chose not to, because I respect our procedural bylaw, and once the vote is there, we have to support it. But that being said, with the ongoing support, and because I voted in favor of the Hamilton's house on 12 4th Street, I was going to, as I said, I was going to bring it forward as a notice of motion tonight for reconsideration at next week's council vote. But through you to the clerk or to Director Valentine, based on the information that we currently have at our disposal, if this is something that I'm able to do at this time. I ask this for the reason, because I think out of the few that voted to support or to vote against that, I think maybe I've been the one that has been chosen within the community with the vast amount of media stories they've had and their petition to get in contact with me, and maybe my one business's prime location close to their home. So if I can get that answer through you to whoever you choose to answer it, that would be greatly appreciated.
Director Valentine. And Clerk Almus. Clerk, you've got your card up. Go ahead first, and then I'll go ahead. Sarah, please.
Certainly. And if I miss anything, Director Valentine is welcome to add her comments. So we actually, staff did meet with the Hamiltons, I believe it was early last week, regarding the request for reconsideration, and staff had agreed to consult with legal regarding the possibility of council doing a reconsideration in accordance with our procedural bylaw. And what we received came back that, albeit the opportunity exists within our procedural bylaw to reconsider a previous decision, a matter cannot be reconsidered if the action cannot be reversed. And this is the legal actually advice we received directly from Miller Thompson. So unlike a regular council decision, this decision is made under the authority of the Ontario Heritage Act and set in motion an appeal right, timelines, and processes. Having rendered its decision, council is now functus officio, and again, I'm sure legal language here is not correct, but it is a legal Latin term, which is used to describe the status of a body that has performed its statutory function and no longer has legal authority over the matter. Legal authority over this decision now rests before the Ontario Land Tribunal, and the appeal period is running effective the date that the decision was made by council.
Director Valentine, anything to add to that?
Thank you, Your Worship. Nothing further to add to the clerk's comments at this time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Madigan, follow up?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. With the ongoing support that these people are getting, this really answers the question to the people in town that are coming to a poor guy like me who has no understanding of the legalities of this. And I just thought I would pose a question tonight, and hopefully this gives them the answers that they deserve and want. They might not agree with it, but at least this gives them an opportunity rather than me trying to fumble my way through it. So I appreciate everybody trying to help with this, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other business tonight, Council? First, I'm going to go to Clerk Almas. Go ahead, Sarah.
Sorry, thank you, Your Worship. I did receive a comment from a member of council, and I had not responded, and I didn't want the member of council to lose their opportunity. I was requested if council was still interested in reducing the number of members within council's composition to a lower amount, when that would have to be confirmed by. So that would have to be a decision made by council, and it has to be made prior to December 31st of this year. So if a member of council is interested at this point, that the only option would be provide a notice of motion at this meeting, or a notice of motion at the meeting of the 20th, and requesting notice be waived so we can meet that December 31st timeline if that is the will of council. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And with that answer on the floor, is there a comment, question? Councillor Hammond, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was the councillor who asked the question of Clerk Almas. And if I may ask through you, Mr. Mayor, where does the deadline arise? Like, why do we have a deadline of December 31st?
Clerk Almas.
Certainly, I believe it's a requirement to the Municipal Elections Act that actually sets that time frame, or a regulation there under, but I can confirm that.
Follow up, Councillor.
Really, just a comment, Mr. Mayor. I had raised this in the context of the discussions which we haven't engaged in, but there's been comments at this table about whether turning our mind to whether our complement, some or all of us, should be full or part-time. And I know we won't have that discussion until the new year, but I wanted to have the opportunity to raise as part of that discussion whether if we were to move to a full-time council, would fewer members be warranted. But it does seem odd to me to be talking about it separately, because in my mind, they go hand in hand. So hence my question, are we really stuck with a December 31 date?
All right, well, Clerk Almas, I think, is going to look into that and confirm it for you. And in the interim, if you feel you want to bring it on, you can bring it on next week, or put a notice of motion on now. It's up to you. Next week, you'd have to ask for council to waive the notice period, but clearly there's a deadline, or to be confirmed.
I think, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I'll wait and get the full picture here before I bring forward a motion. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Comey, you had your card up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So it just like a compliment and a question very quickly, please. The first is just a general compliment that it's so nice to see more or less the masonry work completed over at the Fisherfield Clubhouse. If anyone hasn't had a chance to drive by and see it, you really get a sense very clearly of the design effort that went into it and its size and scope. So I just think that's a very positive, exciting way to have ended off the year. So congratulations to Director Culver and all his team that would have worked so diligently through the many iterations of that. That's going to be a big win. And then just a question, please. So many residents and particularly moms have observed a set of what appear to be traffic lights above the beloved Hamilton Drain crossing. And so through you, Mr. Mayor, to Director Slama, the question I'm getting is, are their eyes deceiving them? And then what will that push mechanism look like? Or is it just an enhancement or is it a full stop? And sort of just an update on that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Director Slama.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Comey and the rest of council. Yes, so work has begun, and it's my understanding that the contractors to be on site this week to complete the installations of the pedestrian traffic signals that will be installed at the Hamilton Drain. So fingers crossed that it does get completed this week, and it's possible they could be operational very, very shortly.
Very
exciting
good.
News.
It is. Follow up, Councillor Comey.
So just quickly, there's a question I'm getting asked is it a full, so they're going to push and then will it go yellow, like a caution? And then the question is, how will kids know what to do? How's it going to work in a nutshell?
Director Slama.
Yeah, thank you. Through you to Councillor Comey. It's the same type of pedestrian traffic signal as we installed at Niagara and Huron. So yes, they push the button and it is a traffic signal. All vehicles will need to stop, and then pedestrians and cyclists and anyone else using it will cross.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Council, any other business? Seeing none, we don't have any in camera tonight. The result of the vote, and that brings us then to our confirmatory bylaw, which reads that bylaw number 2021-91 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the regular meeting of council held December 13, 2021 be enacted and passed this 13th day of December 2021. And I get a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Berman and Councillor Doherty. It's been a long meeting and a productive one, so I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. And that brings us to an adjournment. Thank you, Councillor. All in favor? All right, everyone. That was a productive meeting. Thank you for your time. Thank you, staff. It's been a great